Chapter 2249. The figure in front of Yi Xian was silent. After a long time, the figure said, "You're amazing." "Yi Xian," the figure said again, "Young man, do you know who the Tribulation Lord is?" Yi Xian said seriously, "I don't know, but I know that Senior is not afraid of him at all." The figure smiled, "Why do you say so?" Yi Xian smiled, "If Senior is afraid of him, you wouldn't have listened to me so much." The figure nodded, "I am not afraid of him, but I don't want to provoke him and the forces behind him." Yi Xian suddenly said, 1 year, Senior will protect us for 1 year. The figure was silent for a moment, then said, "I can't protect you for a year, but I can find a place for you. You can go there because the Tribulation Lord doesn't dare to rashly go there, but it's extremely dangerous." Yi Xian asked, "What place?" The figure said, "The Primordial God Land, an ancient civilization forbidden area. Even a powerhouse like the Time Immortal doesn't dare to rashly step into that place. Of course, there are opportunities there." Yi Xian was silent. The figure continued, "You choose." Yi Xian turned to look at Dao Ling and Shirtian. Dao Ling said solemnly, "We'll listen to you." Shirtian nodded, "We'll listen to Brother Yi." Yi Xian said, "Let's go." The figure said, "Think carefully." Yi Xian said with a smile, "Yes." The figure nodded slightly, opened his palm, and a huge teleportation array appeared in front of Yi Xian's group. The figure said, "Enter this array and you can reach the Primordial God Land." Dao Ling and Shirtian were about to enter when Yi Xian suddenly said, "What's your name, Senior?" The figure smiled, Huang." Yi Xian nodded slightly, and was about to speak, when a terrifying aura came from the distant horizon. At the same time, lightning flashed all around. Tribulation Lord. Seeing this, Yi Xian's group's expression changed slightly. Huang said, "Go in. I'll stop him." Yi Xian bowed slightly, "Senior Huang, the 3 of us will remember this favor." Huang laughed and said, "I hope you remember what you said today." Yi Xian nodded. "Definitely." Then, he led Dao Ling and Shirtian into the teleportation formation. Yi Xian's group of 3 had just vanished when the Tribulation Lord appeared here. The Tribulation Master looked at Huang. Huang, are you going to interfere in this matter?" Huang said plainly, "They have already gone to the Great Void Immortal Lands. If you have the guts, go after them." Great Void Immortal Land. Hearing this, Huang's expression instantly became unsightly. However, Huang didn't pay any attention to him and disappeared from where he stood. The Culpa Lord remained silent for a moment before he vanished on the spot. After entering the teleportation array, Yi Xian's group of 3 suddenly felt the world spinning around them. It did not take long before the 3 of them appeared in a mountain range. Looking around, they saw an endless mountain range that they could not see the end of. Yi Xian suddenly said, "Let's find a place first." As soon as he finished speaking, he glanced at the surroundings and vanished on the spot. In an instant, he'd arrived at the peak of a mountain range. Dao Ling and Shirtian followed closely behind him. They were able to look down at the boundless mountain range from this position. Yi Xian suddenly said, "Have all of you noticed something?" Dao Ling was slightly puzzled, "What is it?" Yi Xian spoke softly, "It's too quiet." Only now did Dao Ling and Shirtian notice that it was just as Yi Xian had said. It had been unusually quiet since they'd arrived here. Yi Xian spoke in a low voice, "There's a formidable existence here. Moreover, that existence has definitely noticed us." Dao Ling spoke in a low voice, "What should we do?" Yi Xian glanced at the surroundings and said, "Senior, since you've noticed us, then why don't you show yourself?" His voice had just resounded when an old man suddenly appeared not too far away from Yi Xian's group of 3. The old man wore an ancient black robe, had white hair, and an extremely sharp gaze that was like that of an eagle's. The old man stared at Yi Xian's group of 3 and said, "You possess the karmic luck of the Grand Tao." Yi Xian nodded, "Yes." The old man's face was expressionless, why have we come here? Yi Xian smiled. The seniors of our clan asked us to come here to temper ourselves. The seniors of our clan. The old man frowned slightly. You came here to temper yourselves? Yi Xian nodded. They said that this place is the most dangerous, so they asked us to play here for a while before returning. The old man gazed at Yi Xian and didn't speak. Yi Xian suddenly grinned, and then he opened his palm, causing a spatial ring to float over to the old man. There were 100,000 universe veins within the spatial ring. The old man was stunned by this scene. What are you doing? Yi Xian smiled. Senior, we've just arrived here, so we really don't know much about this place. We want to understand this place. The old man's expression gradually softened as he put the spatial ring away and said, it's a small matter. This place is the Divine Void Grounds, and it's divided into 4 regions, north, south, east, and west. Every single region has a terrifying existence, the region lord. They're existences that you absolutely can't offend. Otherwise, you might die even if you possess the karmic luck of the Grand Tao. Yi Xian nodded slightly. I understand. The old man continued, besides the region lords of these 4 regions, there are also some primeval variant beasts. All of them were left behind from the primeval times, and they're extremely terrifying as well. Don't offend them rashly. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment and said, Senior, which places are safer? The old man glanced at Yi Xian and said, nowhere is safe. Yi Xian was speechless. The old man continued, moreover, forgive me for being blunt, but it's really dangerous for you to come here. Because many experts covet the karmic luck of the Grand Tao that you possess. Yi Xian said in a low voice, Senior, there's something I don't understand. We possess the karmic luck of the Grand Tao, which means that Dedeabi is on our side. Why would anyone dare to touch us? The old man said indifferently, that's true, but possessing the karmic luck of the Grand Tao doesn't mean that you're invincible. You should know that if you act improperly and do something you shouldn't, your karmic luck of the Grand Tao will dissipate, and once it does, you'll die as well. Yi Xian fell silent. I should have asked Qing, to get Dedeabi to give me more karmic luck of the Grand Tao. Dedeabi? The old man continued, however, ordinary experts wouldn't dare to look for you. You possess the karmic luck of the Grand Tao, so you're obviously not ordinary. Ordinary experts wouldn't dare to offend you, but if they do, then they're definitely top experts. Yi Xian nodded slightly. Understood. The old man glanced at Yi Xian. Take care. After saying that, he vanished on the spot. In the field, Dao Ling, who was beside Yi Xian, suddenly said, Brother Yi, what should we do now? Yi Xian thought about it and said, some of the top experts here must already know of our arrival. Therefore, it's impossible to keep a low profile. Since we can't keep a low profile, we'll keep a high profile. We'll keep a high profile. Dao Ling was a little curious. How do we keep a high profile? Yi Xian looked around. Then he said with a smile, follow me. After saying that, he suddenly rode his sword and soared into the sky. Dao Ling and Shirtian looked at each other and hesitated for a moment before following him. Yi Xian began to fly on the sword at an extremely fast speed. Not only did he fly on the sword, but he also made the sword emit sword chimes. He rode the sword from south to north, then from north to west, then from west to east. In an instant, the entire great void sacred ground became lively. Many powerhouses raised their heads to look at Yi Xian and the other 2 who were riding on their swords in the sky, their faces filled with confusion. Where did this show-off come from? Soon, Yi Xian rode his sword around the entire great void sacred ground. No one came out to stop the 3 of them. In the sky, Yi Xian suddenly laughed. Is the southern region domain lord around? There was no response. Yi Xian suddenly used sword draw to determine life and death in the sky. After that, he used one sword to determine life and death. Finally, he activated his bloodline power. The powerful bloodline power engulfed the entire sky. The entire sky turned blood red and the entire great void sacred ground felt a powerful bloodline power. That attitude was just short of saying, I have someone backing me. At the side, Dao Ling and Shirtian were stunned. What was Brother Yi doing? At this moment, a middle-aged man suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian's group. As soon as the middle-aged man appeared, Yi Xian's group of 3 felt an invisible pressure. It was even more terrifying than the Culpa Lords. The middle-aged man looked at Yi Xian without saying a word. Yi Xian smiled. Senior, are you the Southern Region Domain Lord? The middle-aged man nodded. Yi Xian smiled. I've heard of your name for a long time. The Southern Region Domain Lord frowned. You've heard of me? Yi Xian nodded. I've heard of you from my elders. The Southern Region Domain Lord looked at Yi Xian. Your bloodline is not simple. What's your father's name? Yi Xian replied, Yang Yi. The Southern Region Domain Lord shook his head. I've never heard of him. Yi Xian said with a smile, it's normal that you haven't heard of him. My dad keeps a low profile. As he spoke, he waved his right hand, and then the green-clothed man's image appeared here. The Southern Region Domain Lord was shocked when he saw the green-clothed man. Just an image actually makes me feel slightly uneasy. Yi Xian suddenly said, Senior, to tell you the truth, I've come here to ask for your help. I want to form good karma with you. The Southern Region Domain Lord glanced at Yi Xian. What kind of good karma? Yi Xian spoke seriously, the 3 of us are being pursued by the Culpa Lord, and he should be here soon. We want to ask Senior to help us stop him. The Southern Region Domain Lord immediately shook his head. It has nothing to do with me. Yi Xian suddenly pointed at himself, Dao Ling, and Shirtian, Senior, what do you think of the 3 of us? The Southern Region Domain Lord hesitated for a moment before he said, very outstanding. Even during the primeval times, all of you were top-rate monstrous geniuses. Yi Xian spoke seriously, Senior, to be honest, no one in this world is more monstrous than the 3 of us. We'll definitely be invincible in the future. Right now, we just need a little bit of time. If Senior can buy us some time and allow us to grow, then we'll definitely be invincible in the future. 10 years? 3 years? No. We just need a year. So long as Senior can buy us some time, then we'll be invincible after a year. Invincible throughout the world. As he spoke, he grinned, Senior, this deal is really worth it. The Southern Region Domain Lord was speechless. Chapter 2250. The Southern Territory Lord was filled with disbelief. There's actually such a shameless person in this world. Dao Ling and Shirtian were slightly embarrassed as well. A year? Invincible? Needless to say, that was quite exaggerated. Meanwhile, the Southern Territory Lord spoke solemnly, Young Master Yi, I don't really want to get involved in the matter between you and the Culpa Lord. Yi Xian nodded, I know and understand. However, if you're willing to help. The Southern Territory Lord shook his head, I'm sorry, I don't want to get involved. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and vanished into the horizon. Yi Xian remained silent on the spot. A short while later, Yi Xian said, let's go. The 3 of them were about to leave and an old man suddenly appeared before them. The old man wore a loose linen robe and had a wine gourd hanging from his waist. The old man smiled, wait. Wait. Yi Xian gazed at the old man, Senior, you're? The old man smiled, Old man, the Northern Territory Lord. Yi Xian was slightly stunned, Senior, do you need something? The old man nodded and smiled, Young friend, I heard everything you said to the Southern Territory Lord. He isn't willing to help you and your brothers, but I am. Come, let's go to the Northern Territory. Yi Xian and the others exchanged glances. In the end, Yi Xian spoke in a low voice, why? The old man roared with laughter, I'm willing to owe all of you a favor. I believe that even though it's worthless now, it'll definitely be worth a fortune in the future. Yi Xian smiled. Senior, I might have exaggerated a little when I said I'd be invincible in a year. The old man blinked. That's your problem. In any case, I'm only responsible for protecting all of you for a year. I guarantee that the Culpa Lord won't be able to cause trouble for you during that year. After that, I won't care about it anymore. After all, the power behind that Culpa Lord isn't simple, and I don't want to offend it. Yi Xian nodded. Deal. The Northern Territory Lord smiled. Come, let's go to the Northern Territory. With that, he turned around and disappeared into the horizon. Yi Xian brought Dao Ling and Shi Tian along with him. Before long, they arrived at the northern region. Within a stone palace, the Northern Domain's domain lord smiled and said, "The Tribulation Lord is already here." Yi Xian frowned. They're already here? The region lord of the northern region nodded. He has already entered this place. He will arrive at the northern region in at most half an hour. As he spoke, he glanced at Yi Xian and the other two. Is 1 year enough? Yi Xian nodded. That's enough. The northern region lord nodded. I don't have any cultivation resources, so I can't provide them for you. However, I do have a place to cultivate. If you want to find a place to cultivate, I can provide it for you. Yi Xian smiled and said, "Thank you." The northern region lord suddenly raised his head and looked outside the stone door. He smiled and said, "They're here. I'll go meet him." With that, he stood up and left. Within the stone palace, Yi Xian suddenly said, "If we cultivate normally, we definitely won't be able to surpass the time realm in a short time. Our current cultivation realm doesn't have enough time. So, I think the three of us should train together." Dao Ling frowned slightly. Cooperate? Yi Xian nodded. I've estimated the difference in strength between the three of us and the Tribulation Lord. It's not too big. If we cooperate well, we have a chance to kill him. And to cooperate, we need to know each other's trump cards and moves. Only then will we be able to cooperate perfectly. Dao Ling suddenly said, "I have no problem." Shi Tian also said, "I also have no problem." Yi Xian nodded slightly. Then I'll go first. My strongest trump card is severing the future, severing the past, severing the present. Soon, inside the stone palace, the three of them began to introduce their trump cards and trump cards. Outside the stone house, the Tribulation Lord looked at the Northern Region Lord with a calm expression. "Sir, do you really want to interfere in this matter?" The Northern Region Lord smiled. "Tribulation Lord, I'm a little curious. You should know that the three of them aren't simple, so why are you targeting them? Aren't you afraid of the Great Tao?" The Tribulation Lord said indifferently, "That's our business." The Northern Region Lord smiled. "Looks like there's nothing to talk about." The Tribulation Lord looked at the Northern Region Lord. "Northern Region Lord, I advise you not to interfere in this matter. Not to mention you, even the entire primordial god land can't bear the consequences." The Northern Region Lord's eyes narrowed. "Is that so?" The Tribulation Lord's expression was calm. "Since we can't talk, then we'll fight." With that, he vanished on the spot. The Northern Region Lord laughed. "That's exactly what I wanted." With that, he vanished on the spot. On the other side, the Southern Region Lord was watching the battle between the Northern Region Lord and the Tribulation Lord, and a middle-aged man was standing by his side. It was the Eastern Region Lord. The Eastern Region Lord spoke softly. "This old fox from the north never does anything that causes him to lose out. He actually went head-on against the Tribulation Lord for the sake of those three youths." The Southern Region Lord's expression was calm. "Don't you think those three youths are really extraordinary?" The Eastern Region Lord nodded. "They are extraordinary indeed. Even during the primeval times, they were true geniuses. But, it's those people who are targeting them." The Southern Region Lord fell silent. The Eastern Region Lord glanced at the Southern Region Lord and smiled. "What are you thinking about?" The Southern Region Lord shook his head slightly. "I was slightly tempted when that youth asked me for help, and I wanted to form a good relationship with him. But as he spoke, he shook his head once more. I'm still fearful. The Tribulation Lord isn't terrifying, but the people behind him are. If I help that youth, then even though I can form a good relationship with him, I'll form a bad relationship with those people behind him. The Eastern Region Lord nodded slightly. Those people are indeed terrifying. As he spoke, he looked at the Northern Region Lord in the distance. This old guy knows about those people, but he still dares to do this. What gives him the right to do this? Isn't it simple? At this moment, a voice suddenly sounded from the side. The two turned to look. Not far away, a beautiful woman was slowly walking towards them. This person was the Western Region Lord. The Western Region Lord chuckled. Everyone, what do you think the three of us want to do the most right now? The Eastern Region Lord frowned slightly. Of course it's to transcend time. As he spoke, his pupils suddenly shrank. That youth can help him transcend time? The Southern Region Lord frowned slightly. That's impossible. The Western Region Lord shook his head and smiled. Why is it impossible? I think it's completely possible. The Eastern Region Lord was puzzled. Why? The Western Region Lord said softly, intuition. The Southern Region Lord and the Northern Region Lord's expressions instantly froze. The Western Region Lord shook his head and smiled. Actually, I really admire that old guy from the Northern Region. He really has the guts, and he dares to fight. The Eastern Region Lord said lightly, he dares to fight, but if he doesn't succeed, I'm afraid he'll lose his life. The Western Region Lord turned to look at the horizon, and said softly, but what if he succeeds? What if that young man can really bring him a great opportunity? The three fell into silence. Inside the stone hall, Yi Xian and the other two began to have an in-depth discussion. They exchanged their experiences in cultivation and martial arts. Needless to say, the three of them benefited greatly from the discussion. The three of them had different fighting styles, and their use of various powers was also different. Dao Ling focused on the Law and Dao, which was the all-elephant's Dharma body that he mainly cultivated. Shi Tian, on the other hand, focused on pure speed and strength. He did not have any fixed moves, and he did not have many martial arts techniques. He only focused on speed and strength. As for Yi Xian, he was a swordsman. His sword was different from other swordsmen. His sword was based on craftiness and darkness, and it focused on surprise and killing in one move. After the three of them discussed, they all understood something. After a long time, the three of them began to try to learn from each other. More accurately, they were practicing their coordination. With their current strength, if they wanted to kill the Tribulation Lord, they had to cooperate perfectly. And this was not difficult for them. Outside the stone hall. In the void, the Tribulation Lord and the Northern Region Lord suddenly stopped. The Tribulation Lord looked at the Northern Region Lord with an ugly expression. He realized that he could not do anything to this Northern Region Lord. The Northern Region Lord smiled. Tribulation Lord, you can't do anything to me, and I don't want to kill you. You should go back. The Tribulation Lord stared at the Northern Region Lord. Northern Region Lord, are you really going to interfere in this matter? The Northern Region Lord smiled. I won't hide it from you. I want to fight. Even if I lose in the end, I will have no regrets. The Tribulation Lord shook his head. You'll definitely lose. As soon as he finished speaking, he opened his palm, and then a transmission talisman suddenly vanished. The Northern Region Lord's eyes instantly narrowed when he witnessed this scene. Obviously, the Tribulation Lord had called for help. The Tribulation Lord had a calm expression on his face. Northern Region Lord, you'll regret this. The Northern Region Lord roared with laughter. Let's wait and see. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left. The Tribulation Lord's expression was calm, and no one knew what he was thinking. Below, the Lord of the Northern Region had returned to his own stone hall. There was a scroll in front of his desk. He opened the scroll, and all the information about Yi Xian was within it. It was very complete. Meanwhile, an old man appeared by the Northern Region Lord's side, and he spoke in a low voice. Regional Lord, We're making a huge bet this time. The Northern Region Lord spoke softly. If I don't obtain a huge fortuitous encounter, then my life will come to an end. Besides waiting for death, there's nothing else I can do. What's the point of living like that? The old man hesitated for a moment and said, will that young man really be able to help us? The Northern Region Lord spoke softly, I don't know. All I know is that he's that person's son. The old man was slightly puzzled. Who? A trace of fear suddenly appeared in the Northern Region Lord's eyes. That swordsman. That terrifying swordsman who made me feel like I was dead just by looking at me all those years ago. A ferocious expression flashed through his eyes as he spoke. I'm going to bet. I'm betting that this young man is an extraordinarily formidable second generation. Damn it. My life has come to an end, and if I don't ride on someone powerful, how can I improve further? Even if I lose this bet, I have no regrets. The old man was speechless. 2 hours later, Dao Ling and Shi Tian appeared before the Tribulation Lord. Dao Ling gazed at the Tribulation Lord. Let's fight again. The Tribulation Lord's eyes narrowed slightly. Then what about Yi Xian? Dao Ling frowned. Just the two of us will fight you. The Tribulation Lord spoke furiously. Fight my ass. Tell the Yi Xian to come out. I won't fight the two of you if he doesn't. As soon as he finished speaking, he retreated explosively. Dao Ling was speechless. Chapter 2251. The Tribulation Lord was very clearly aware that Yi Xian was definitely plotting something since he was hiding in the shadows. Even though he hadn't known Yi Xian for long, he knew that the young man was an extremely sinister person. But now, the young man hadn't shown himself, so it was very obvious that the young man intended to play some sort of trick. After the loss he'd suffered last time, he didn't dare underestimate Yi Xian's group anymore. After all, their joint forces could threaten his life. The Tribulation Lord was still quite worried, and he moved 3 kilometers back. It didn't take long for his divine sense to sweep out like a net, and it instantly covered an area of a few million kilometers. However, he still didn't notice Yi Xian. The Tribulation Lord frowned slightly. Where is he? Dao Ling hesitated for a moment and said, he's fled. The Tribulation Lord glared angrily at Dao Ling. What nonsense. Do you think I would believe that? Dao Ling was speechless. Damn it. That bastard isn't falling for it. The Tribulation Lord was still looking vigilantly at the surroundings because he couldn't rest at ease so long as Yi Xian didn't show himself. Moreover, his intuition told him that something was off. Why? After Yi Xian's group of 3 had been blasted into pieces by him, they'd been constantly on the run. Yet now, they'd actually dared to show themselves in front of him. What did that mean? It meant that they might have a way to deal with him. When he thought up to here, the Tribulation Lord didn't hesitate to turn around and vanish into the horizon. He wasn't a rash fellow, so he naturally had to flee when he sensed that something was off. Dao Ling and Shi Tian were stunned when they saw the Tribulation Lord flee. He fled just like that? Meanwhile, Yi Xian appeared here, and he frowned slightly as he looked up into the sky. The Tribulation Lord's actions surprised him. He hadn't expected that the Tribulation Lord would actually flee just like that. Dao Ling spoke solemnly. Brother Yi, what should we do now? Yi Xian shook his head and felt quite helpless. If the Tribulation Lord was determined to flee, then the 3 of them would really be helpless against him. After all, it was too difficult to keep an expert at such a level from escaping. Meanwhile, the Northern Territory Region Lord appeared here. He looked up into the sky and spoke softly. He called for help just now, and it won't be long before that person behind him shows up. Yi Xian suddenly said, Senior, we have to go. The Northern Region Lord looked at Yi Xian. Leave? Yi Xian nodded. Staying here will only implicate you. Of course, the 3 of us will always remember Senior's help. He knew that the Northern Region Lord was very strong, but if they stayed here, they would definitely implicate the entire Northern region. The Northern Region Lord wanted to say something, but Yi Xian suddenly smiled and said, We have decided. The Northern Region Lord spoke in a low voice, all of you can head to the primeval shrine. If all of you are able to enter it, then the Tribulation Lord and those behind him might not be able to do anything to all of you. Yi Xian frowned. Primordial Shrine? The Northern Region Lord nodded slightly. Yes. That is a forbidden area here. No one dares to enter that place, including the 4 domain lords. But I think that if you go there, there shouldn't be a problem. Yi Xian smiled and asked, why? The Northern Region Lord spoke solemnly, all of you possess the karmic luck of the Grand Tao. Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, then let's give it a try. The Northern Region Lord nodded. Head south, and the primeval shrine is 5,000 kilometers away. Yi Xian cupped his fists and smiled, Senior, we'll meet again. As soon as he finished speaking, he led Dao Ling and Qing Er away. Suddenly, Yi Xian stopped and said, Senior, do you have any wishes? The Northern Region Lord was slightly stunned, and then he hurriedly said, transcend time. Yi Xian nodded slightly. I'll help you fulfill that wish right now. The Northern Region Lord was stunned. Right now? Yi Xian nodded. Right now. Otherwise, I'm afraid that I'll forget about it once I leave this place. The Northern Region Lord was speechless. Yi Xian suddenly raised his head and spoke softly, Qing, I know you can hear me. This senior isn't bad. Give him a fortuitous encounter. Boom. The spacetime above the Northern Region Lord's head suddenly split open, an array of white light entered the Northern Region Lord's head. Rumble. The Northern Region Lord's body shook violently as countless information surged into his mind. After a long time, the Northern Region Lord suddenly opened his eyes, and his body trembled with excitement. So that's how it is. So that's how it is. In the distance, Yi Xian suddenly said, Senior, take care. As soon as he finished speaking, he walked towards the distance. The Northern Region Lord suddenly bowed deeply. Thank you, young Master Yi. Young Master Yi. In that instant, he understood that there was an extremely terrifying existence behind Yi Xian. How terrifying! It was indescribable. Yi Xian and the other 2 vanished into the distance. The Northern Region Lord immediately turned around and left. He had a new direction now, and transcending time was only a matter of time. In the distance, Dao Ling, who was beside Yi Xian, suddenly said, Brother Yi, I know you want to rely on yourself, but can you ask your sister to help me? I don't want to rely on myself anymore. Yi Xian was speechless. Dao Ling said seriously, Brother Yi, I'm serious. Shi Tian hesitated for a moment, and then he said, Brother Dao Ling, you shouldn't think like that. We have to rely on ourselves. It's only meaningful to become strong through our own cultivation. Dao Ling sighed softly. You don't know about Brother Ye's cheating devices. Whoever uses them will love them. Yi Xian was speechless. Right at this moment, the Southern Region Lord, Eastern Region Lord, and Western Region Lord appeared before Yi Xian and the other 2. The Southern Region Lord cupped his fists and said, Yi Company. Yi Xian smiled. What's the matter? The Southern Region Lord said in a low voice, Young Master Yi, the Northern Region Lord has just entered closed-door cultivation. Yi Xian blinked. What does that have to do with you? As soon as he finished speaking, he led the 3 of them and vanished. The Southern Region Lord and the other 2 had extremely unsightly expressions on their faces. It didn't take long for them to arrive at a wasteland. A huge hall stood towering at the end of the wasteland. The hall was over 1 kilometer tall, and it was a magnificent sight. Moreover, it carried a trace of an ancient aura. The 3 of them walked towards the primeval divine hall. All along the way, Yi Xian and the other 2 frowned. Because they'd noticed numerous corpses of demon beasts all along the way. Some of these corpses were very old, but some were very new. Moreover, these corpses only had bones and no flesh. Yi Xian and the other 2 exchanged glances and became vigilant. After walking for a short while, the three of them suddenly stopped. Not far in front of them on the right, there was a small slope, and behind the small slope, there was a youth squatting there. The youth had very long hair, and it had already reached his waist, and it was very messy, like a chicken coop. In front of him was a huge demonic beast corpse, and at this moment, the youth was crazily eating the meat of the demonic beast corpse. He was eating demon beasts. And he was eating them raw. Yi Xian and the other two exchanged glances, and they were slightly shocked. Dao Ling spoke in a low voice, "This brother really has strong tastes." Right at this moment, the young man suddenly turned around to look at Dao Ling. As soon as he turned around, Yi Xian and the other two saw the young man's appearance. The young man's eyes were suffused with a ferocious glow. The young man stomped his feet on the ground, and the entire ground collapsed. Meanwhile, he relied on the terrifying force to leap up and pounce towards Dao Ling like a wolf pouncing on its prey. Dao Ling frowned slightly. "What's wrong with you?" As soon as he finished speaking, he charged forward. Rumble. The space in the surroundings suddenly shook violently, and then both of them retreated explosively. After Dao Ling stopped, a wisp of a solemn expression flashed through his eyes, and he gazed at the young man in the distance. His physical body is so terrifying. Yi Xian glanced at the young man. He noticed it as well. The young man seems to be a body cultivator. Right at this moment, Shirtian spoke abruptly. "He possesses karmic luck of the Grand Tao as well." Yi Xian and Shirtian were stunned when they heard this. Shirtian gazed at the young man in the distance that was filled with hostility, and he spoke in a low voice. "I never expected that there would be someone here that possesses karmic luck of the Grand Tao." Yi Xian was slightly curious. "How did you notice?" Shirtian spoke in a low voice. "I have a secret technique called the aura observation technique that allows me to observe karmic luck. The karmic luck on this person is the karmic luck of the Grand Tao. He's the same as us." Dao Ling frowned slightly. "We both possess karmic luck of the Grand Tao, so we're on the same side. Why is he so hostile towards us?" Yi Xian rolled his eyes at Dao Ling. "I'm afraid you're an idiot. It's precisely because we both possess karmic luck of the Grand Tao that he's hostile towards us." Dao Ling instantly came to an understanding when he heard this. He'd actually almost forgotten that they were fighting for karmic luck of the Grand Tao. Shirtian spoke in a low voice. "This fellow wants to kill us." Yi Xian glanced at the young man, and the young man's eyes were filled with killing intent. Yi Xian spoke abruptly. "Beat him up first." As soon as he finished speaking, the three of them vanished on the spot. In the distance, the young man was stunned. In the next moment, he roared furiously and charged forward. Numerous explosions resounded incessantly in the surroundings, and it wasn't long before the young man was beaten up. After a short moment, Yi Xian's group of three stopped, and all of them were slightly shocked. Because they noticed that the young man's body was extraordinarily terrifying. The joint forces of the three of them were actually unable to break through the young man's defenses. Dao Ling glanced at his right hand. His right hand had split apart, but the young man in the distance was completely unharmed. Of course, it wasn't good for the young man as well. After all, he'd been beaten up by the joint forces of the three of them. He wasn't injured, but it didn't look good. Shirtian spoke abruptly in a low voice. "He seems to only know how to hit randomly." Yi Xian nodded because he'd noticed it as well. The young man before them had been completely disorganized when they'd fought earlier, and he'd been hitting randomly. If it wasn't for his body being too abnormal, then the three of them would have been able to instantly annihilate him with ease. Perhaps they could break through the young man's defenses with the green profound sword in their possession. But now, according to the degree of the young man's defense was abnormal, they would probably be unable to do anything to the young man even if they struck him 100 times. What a freak. Of course, if the three of them were to really go all out, they should be able to exhaust the young man to death. In the distance, the young man stared at Yi Xian and the other two with a ferocious expression. The next moment, he suddenly leaped and directly crashed into Yi Xian and the other two. Yi Xian said calmly, use some force. Let him know why the flowers are red. After that, the three of them disappeared on the spot at the same time. This time, the three of them didn't fight the young man head-on. Rumble, rumble, rumble. In the field, the young man was being brutally beaten by Yi Xian and the other two. Faced with the perfect cooperation of Yi Xian and the other two, the young man had no strength to fight back at all. He could only passively take the beating. Just like that, the three of them brutally beat the young man for nearly 15 minutes before stopping. After stopping, the young man's hands trembled. He glared at Yi Xian and the other two and roared, "One-on-one." "One-on-one?" Yi Xian said seriously, "Brother, times have changed. Now, it's about numbers. Unity is power. Haven't you heard of it?" The young man was speechless. Chapter 2252. Ganging up on him. The young man's expression turned ferocious when he heard Yi Xian's words. He roared furiously and charged at Yi Xian. Yi Xian's expression was calm. Beat him up. The three of them vanished on the spot. Rumble. Numerous explosions resounded incessantly in the surroundings. The three of them were very powerful. The energy that leaked out directly cracked the ground around them. However, the surrounding spacetime was completely unharmed. Vicious beatings. The young man did not even have the strength to fight back. He was beaten up. It was hard to say if it was one-on-one. However, 3-on-1 was like a father beating his son. About 15 minutes later, Yi Xian's group of three stopped. The young man's expression was extremely ugly. He roared madly at Yi Xian's group of three as if he had gone mad. He kept shouting, "One-on-one." Yi Xian said calmly, "Continue beating him up." The three of them vanished on the spot once again. The young man was speechless. Just like that, Yi Xian's group of three beat up the young man for a full hour. The young man did not have the strength to fight back at all during this hour. Although his physical body was really terrifying, he could not withstand this beating. After all, the pain was still there. After a long time, Yi Xian's group of three stopped. The young man glanced at Yi Xian's group of three. Although there was still anger in his eyes, he had calmed down overall. Yi Xian smiled. "What's your name?" The young man stared fixedly at Yi Xian and did not speak. Yi Xian said solemnly, "No discord, no concord. Let's be friends." Dao Ling and Shitian's expressions froze. The young man broke through their defenses and roared, "Scram!" As he spoke, his blood surged and he was about to charge at Yi Xian's group of three. However, he quickly calmed down. He suddenly remembered that he was not a match for the three of them. Yi Xian smiled faintly. "You should have already discovered our identities." "That's right, we are the possessors of the Great Path Luck. Now, you have two choices. 1. Join us. 2. The three of us kill you and divide the Great Path Luck on you." The youth. Beside Yi Xian, Dao Ling said in a low voice, "Brother Yi, are you trying to rope him in?" Yi Xian said seriously, "Think about it. What do we lack the most right now? He was a meat shield. If he joins us, with him taking the brunt of the damage, won't it be much easier for us?" Dao Ling blinked and gave a thumbs up. "Brilliant. It's too high." Shitian hesitated for a moment before he said, "He might not join us." Yi Xian smiled and said, "Don't worry, I'll bluff." "Oh, no, I'll have a good talk with him. You see, this brother has a bad temper and gets angry at the slightest provocation. One look and you can tell that he's a simple-minded person. This kind of honest person is the best to bluff, the best to talk to." Shitian and the other man were speechless. Yi Xian glanced at the corpse of the gigantic demon beast in the distance and walked towards it. The youth's expression instantly changed drastically when he saw this, and he roared furiously, "It's mine." Yi Xian glared at the youth. "What do you mean mine?" Good things should be shared, understand? The youth, Yi Xian, walked over to the demon beast's corpse and sized it up. He was slightly shocked in his heart because he noticed that the demon beast's corpse wasn't simple at all. It was filled with abundant energy. Yi Xian didn't think too much about it. He started a fire and started roasting the meat. Yi Xian was extremely skilled in cooking and roasting. Moreover, he'd brought a lot of ingredients with him. It didn't take long for Yi Xian to roast the demon beast's meat until it was golden yellow. Moreover, it was extremely fragrant. Dao Ling and Shi Tian sat down by Yi Xian's side, and then they started to tear apart the meat and eat it. In the distance, the youth stared fixedly at Yi Xian's group of three. His gaze seemed like he wished for nothing more than to eat the meat of Yi Xian's group of three. However, his gaze would occasionally glance at the roasted meat in front of Yi Xian's group. Dao Ling suddenly exclaimed in admiration. "Brother Yi, your culinary skills aren't bad." Shi Tian nodded. "Sure." Yi Xian laughed heartily. Then, he picked up a piece of roasted meat and passed it to the youth. "Do you want some?" The youth stared at Yi Xian and didn't speak. Yi Xian smiled and pointed with his finger. The piece of roasted meat landed steadily in front of the youth. The youth was slightly hesitant. Yi Xian smiled. "It's not good to eat raw meat. Meat should be roasted." The youth looked at the roasted meat in front of him. His throat rolled, but he still endured it. Yi Xian smiled. "Try it." The youth fell silent for a long time. In the end, he couldn't bear it anymore. He picked up the roasted meat and started chewing. In an instant, he finished the roasted meat. Seeing this scene, Yi Xian's group of three was stunned. Why was this guy like a beast? After he finished chewing, the youth looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian smiled and said, "Come over and eat with us." The youth looked at Yi Xian with vigilance in his eyes. Yi Xian smiled. "If we had any ill intentions towards you, we wouldn't be sitting here talking nonsense with you. The three of us are good people. Very good people." The youth hesitated for a while. Then, he walked over to Yi Xian and sat down. He glanced at the three of them. "Eat?" Yi Xian nodded. "Eat." The youth picked up the roasted meat from the rack and started chewing. In less than 2 breaths of time, the roasted meat that was the size of an adult was completely devoured by the youth. Not even the bones were left. Yi Xian's group of three was dumbfounded. What the hell was this guy doing? After the youth finished chewing, he looked at Yi Xian and pointed at the corpse of the demon beast in the distance. "Continue roasting it." Yi Xian was speechless. The youth moved the demon beast corpse in front of Yi Xian and let him roast it. Yi Xian was speechless. He didn't refuse and continued roasting. The youth looked at Yi Xian silently, his saliva dripping down. Yi Xian suddenly smiled and asked, "I'm Yi Xian. The two beside me are called Dao Ling and Shi Tian. What's your name?" The youth's gaze was still fixed on the roasted meat. "Heaven's abandonment." Yi Xian frowned. "Heaven's abandonment?" The youth stared at the roasted meat and didn't speak. Yi Xian sized up Heaven's abandonment. It had to be said that Heaven's abandonment was very sloppy. He was no different from a wild beast. It was obvious that he had lived here alone for a very long time. Moreover, he didn't understand the ways of the world. At this moment, the meat was done roasting. As soon as it was done, Heaven's abandonment picked it up and started eating. Soon, the entire demon beast was eaten clean by him. After that, Heaven's abandonment looked at Yi Xian. At this moment, the hostility in his eyes lessened. Yi Xian smiled. "Do you want to go with us?" Heaven's abandonment frowned. "Go?" Yi Xian nodded. "Go outside and have a look." Heaven's abandonment was silent for a long time. He said, "There's food here." Yi Xian smiled. "There's food outside too." Moreover, there's a lot of food. Heaven's abandonment shook his head. I won't go. Yi Xian didn't understand. Why? Heaven's abandonment said, Father is here. Father. Yi Xian narrowed his eyes. Your father is here? Heaven's abandonment nodded. He turned and pointed at a small hill in the distance. Yi Xian glanced at the hill. In next to no time, he frowned. A demon beast was buried within the hill. Yi Xian looked at Heaven's abandonment. This fellow is a demon beast? In next to no time, he noticed that this fellow really was a demon beast. Dao Ling and Shirtian noticed this as well. No wonder this fellow's body is so strong. Heaven's abandonment suddenly said, Father told me to be careful of all of you. Yi Xian frowned slightly. All of us? Heaven's abandonment nodded. He said to be careful of those that have the same smell as me. Obviously, he was talking about the karmic luck of the Grand Tao. Yi Xian smiled. What do you think? Heaven's abandonment glanced at Yi Xian. You're not a good person. Yi Xian was speechless. Heaven's abandonment suddenly stood up. He turned around and walked over to the hill, and then he lay down before the hill and started to sleep. Shirtian spoke abruptly from the side. The bloodline of the demon beast buried within the hill is different from his. Yi Xian spoke solemnly, in other words, it isn't his biological father that's buried there? Shirtian nodded. Obviously, Heaven's abandonment wasn't simple at all. Dao Ling suddenly asked, Are we still taking him with us? Yi Xian spoke softly, Do you think the Tribulation Lord would let him go if he were to stay here and be noticed by him? Dao Ling spoke softly, That's true. Yi Xian walked over to Heaven's abandonment, squatted down, and said, Do you want to leave? Heaven's abandonment hesitated for a moment, and then he said, Yes. Yi Xian said with a smile, Then come with us. We have enough meat. Heaven's abandonment turned around to glance at the hill behind him. Yi Xian smiled, That's easy. As he spoke, he withdrew a spatial ring and moved the entire hill into it. After that, he passed the spatial ring to Heaven's abandonment. Heaven's abandonment was stunned, and then he said, Inside? Yi Xian nodded. Heaven's abandonment hurriedly put the spatial ring on his hand, and then he rubbed it lightly while a wisp of sorrow flashed through his eyes. Yi Xian suddenly said, You have to dress yourself up. As he spoke, he waved his hand lightly, and all the dirt on Heaven's abandonment was swept away. After that, he withdrew a black robe and put it on Heaven's abandonment. On the other hand, half of Heaven's abandonment's hair had been cut off. It didn't take long for a completely new Heaven's abandonment to appear before Yi Xian's group of 3. Needless to say, Heaven's abandonment had undergone a tremendous change after he dressed himself up and cleaned himself up. Heaven's abandonment was very handsome, but he was slightly cold. His eyes were crimson red, and there was a very deep scar on his chest. Yi Xian glanced at the scar, and he was slightly shocked. He'd experienced how formidable Heaven's abandonment's body was, yet someone had actually been able to injure his body? Yi Xian pointed at the scar on Heaven's abandonment's chest and said, Who did this? Heaven's abandonment shook his head, I don't know. Yi Xian frowned slightly, He's been here since he was young? Heaven's abandonment nodded. Yi Xian fell silent for a moment, and then he nodded slightly, Come with us. Heaven's abandonment glanced at Yi Xian, There's enough meat, right? Yi Xian roared with laughter, Yes. Heaven's abandonment nodded, All right. Yi Xian led the 3 of them towards the primeval shrine. On the way, Heaven's abandonment suddenly gazed at Yi Xian, and then he hesitated for a moment before he said, Can I have some of your meat? Yi Xian's face instantly darkened when he heard this. Damn it. This fellow actually wants to eat me? Dao Ling suddenly roared with laughter. Yi Xian glared at Dao Ling, and then he said, Heaven's abandonment is strong in terms of defense and physical strength, but his techniques are too weak. If he encounters a top-rate expert, then he'll definitely suffer a loss. We have to teach him how to fight. Dao Ling, I'll leave this glorious task to you. Dao Ling's face instantly darkened when he heard this. Chapter 2253. It didn't take long for the three of them to arrive at the primeval shrine. The door to the shrine was over 30 m wide, and there were a few dozen enormous stone pillars that were as thick as an adult's body before it. There were some hideous demon beasts drawn on the stone pillars. Yi Xian took a look at the hall in front of him. The entire hall was filled with an ancient aura. Dao Ling spoke solemnly, "Brother Yi, this place isn't simple at all." Tianqi spoke abruptly, "It's dangerous." Yi Xian gazed at Tianqi, "Have you been here?" Tianqi hesitated for a moment, and then he shook his head, "I wouldn't dare. I wouldn't dare." Yi Xian fell silent. He knew that demon beasts were very sensitive to danger. Since Tianqi hadn't dared to come here, then it was obvious that this place was very dangerous. Moreover, he himself felt quite uneasy right now. It was very dangerous. Right at this moment, the four of them suddenly turned around and saw two extremely terrifying auras sweeping towards them from afar. One of them belonged to the Culpa Lord, and the other was much stronger than the Culpa Lord. Yi Xian immediately said, "Let's go in." As soon as he finished speaking, he pushed open the door to the shrine and led the four of them in. As soon as they entered, the Tribulation Lord and a middle-aged man appeared at the entrance of the shrine. The Tribulation Lord was just about to enter when the middle-aged man stopped him. The Tribulation Lord gazed at the middle-aged man, "Master Yun?" The middle-aged man called Master Yun shook his head slightly, "It's dangerous." The Tribulation Lord spoke solemnly, "I know, but they've entered." Master Yun's expression was calm. "Wait." The Tribulation Lord hesitated for a moment before he said, "My suggestion is that we don't give them a chance. Their strength increases explosively every once in a while." Master Yun didn't answer the Tribulation Lord. He frowned slightly as he gazed at the shrine, and there was a trace of fear and bewilderment in his eyes. There was a trace of worry in the Tribulation Lord's eyes as he gazed at the shrine. It was very dangerous. He felt that it was very dangerous as well, but Yi Xian's group had entered. After they entered the shrine, Yi Xian turned around and noticed that the Tribulation Lord and the middle-aged man hadn't followed them in. Obviously, this place was really dangerous. Yi Xian looked around. The place where they came in was a courtyard. It was very big, and it was all paved with bluestone. In the middle of the courtyard, there was a tree that was almost withered. The surroundings were silent, abnormally silent. At this moment, Tianqi's body suddenly trembled slightly. Yi Xian looked at Tianqi. "What's wrong?" Tianqi clenched his fists and his eyes were filled with vigilance. "Danger! Danger!" At the side, Dao Ling also said in a low voice, "Brother Yi, I feel a little uneasy. It's very strong." Yi Xian suddenly asked, "Is it as dangerous as my sister's sword?" Dao Ling hesitated for a moment before he said, "No." Yi Xian blinked. "Then what are you afraid of?" Dao Ling thought about it and said, "Now that you mention it, I don't think I'm nervous anymore." Shi Tian suddenly said, "Because Brother Yi is here, his sister might not kill you," but here, Dao Ling was speechless. Shi Tian glanced at the withered tree in the distance. "Brother Yi, there's something wrong with this tree." Yi Xian nodded. "I can see that." Shi Tian hesitated for a moment before he said, "Why don't we head out? I can see the danger outside, but the danger here, I can't see it." Yi Xian thought about it and said, "It's fine. I'll take care of it first." As he spoke, he walked towards the withered tree. Shi Tian suddenly pulled Yi Xian back and shook his head. "It's dangerous." Yi Xian nodded. "I know. Then what do you think our chances are if we head out and fight the Culpa Lord?" Shi Tian shook his head. "I don't know. I don't know." Yi Xian smiled. Someone once read my fortune, and he said that my fate is very strong, and it's very difficult for me to die. As he finished speaking, he walked towards the withered tree. Dao Ling suddenly said in a trembling voice, "Brother Yi, who read your fortune? Is it reliable?" Yi Xian roared with laughter. "I think it's probably reliable." As he spoke, he walked over to the withered tree and sat down. "Not too long ago, I told my younger sister not to suppress Daebi. I want to rely on myself to walk down the path of the Grand Tao." When he spoke up to here, he shook his head lightly. "We possess the karmic luck of the Grand Tao, yet we feel that you're very dangerous. Obviously, you're definitely a peerless great figure. We brothers have no ill intent when we enter this hall today, and we merely want to see if we're able to take you as our master. If we're able to take you as our master, then we'll definitely bring Senior's inheritance to glory." He paused for a moment as he spoke up to here, and then he said, "Even though I really want to be humble, it's a pity that my strength doesn't allow me to do so. Amongst the monstrous geniuses in the outside world, there's no one that's more outstanding than us brothers. If Senior intends to leave behind an inheritance or pass on the Tao, then I think that us brothers are very suitable." There was no reply. Dao Ling hesitated for a moment, and then he said, "Shi Tian, do you think Brother Yi will be able to do it?" Shi Tian shook his head. "I don't know." In the distance, Yi Xian bowed slightly. "Senior, if you don't say anything, then it means that you've agreed." As soon as he finished speaking, he hurriedly turned around to look at Dao Ling and the others. "Quickly bow and take him as your master." Dao Ling and Shi Tian were slightly stunned. "What's this? He's taking him as his master just like that?" Yi Xian didn't say anything else, and he directly bowed slightly. "Greetings, master." His voice hadn't finished resounding through the air when a terrifying aura suddenly enveloped Yi Xian. Yi Xian was shocked in his heart, but his expression was very calm because the person hadn't attacked him directly. Meanwhile, the trees suddenly started trembling. In the next moment, a voice resounded from within the tree. "Young man, you're really shameless." Yi Xian was speechless. The voice continued. "What makes you think that I won't kill you?" Yi Xian immediately said, "There's no reason." The voice said, "The karmic luck of the Grand Tao that all four of you possess is extremely beneficial to me as well." Yi Xian laughed heartily. The voice said, "What are you laughing at?" Yi Xian laughed. "I'm laughing because Senior is joking with me. With Senior's strength, why would you care about this insignificant karmic luck? Not to mention this insignificant karmic luck, even Daebi wouldn't be able to do anything to Senior." The voice fell silent. Yi Xian said again, "Senior, you're able to make the four of us feel uneasy with just your aura alone. With such strength, I'm afraid that even Daebi would have to bow his head in submission when he sees your excellency." The voice suddenly laughed. "Young man, you're really good at flattering." Yi Xian bowed slightly. "What Junior said is what I think. There's not a single word of falsehood." The voice laughed. Daebi's ability is much more terrifying than you can imagine. Of course, as you said, I'm really not too afraid of it." Yi Xian bowed slightly. "Senior, do the four of us have the honor of becoming your disciple?" The voice fell silent. Yi Xian nodded slightly. "Junior understands." Saying so, he sighed in a low voice. "It's a great regret that I couldn't become Senior's disciple." The voice suddenly said, "Young man, if it was in the past, I would have been willing to accept the four of you. After all, the four of you are monsters among monsters. Moreover, your temperament is to my liking. Unfortunately, the current me." At this point, he didn't continue speaking. Yi Xian asked in a deep voice, "Senior, are you still alive?" The voice laughed. "What do you think?" Yi Xian shook his head. "I think no one in this world can kill Senior, unless Senior wants to die. Otherwise, who can hurt Senior?" Haha. The voice suddenly laughed. "Little guy, although I know you're flattering me, I have to say that it's really nice to hear. Yi Xian smiled slightly. Senior, when we 4 brothers came in just now, we were a bit uneasy. We thought Senior was a difficult person to talk to, but now it seems we were overthinking. The voice said, just now, you were uneasy because I don't want anyone to disturb me. However, I'm a bit curious about the 4 of you. Logically speaking, the 4 of you should be enemies with each other, but now it seems you're on the same side. Yi Xian smiled. Because we have a stronger enemy. The voice said, the 2 outside? Yi Xian nodded. Yes. I wonder if Senior has heard of that Tribulation Lord. This person is known as the Myriad Tribulation Ancestor, invincible in the universe. The voice suddenly said disdainfully. What bullshit Myriad Tribulation Ancestor? Invincible in the universe. Did he say that? Yi Xian hurriedly nodded. Yes. That day when he bullied us 3 brothers, he told us that he was invincible and we could do whatever we wanted. What bullshit is that? The voice was filled with disdain. It's just a bolt of tribulation lightning that has developed intelligence and attained initial success in cultivation. He actually dares to say that he's invincible. He's truly a frog at the bottom of a well that doesn't know the immensity of the heavens and the earth. Yi Xian spoke solemnly, Senior, that Tribulation Lord is really formidable. Even our joint forces weren't a match for him. When that bolt of tribulation lightning descended, it was simply terrifying. When he spoke up to this point, he paused for a moment before he continued, of course, he's definitely far inferior to Senior. After all, just a strand of Senior's aura was enough to make us 4 brothers feel uneasy and terrified, but we didn't feel that way when facing that Tribulation Lord. But, that Tribulation Lord is very formidable. The voice said, he's actually just a piece of trash, and he's just a lackey of someone else. Even though the 3 of you are inferior to him now, surpassing him in the future is extremely easy. Yi Xian nodded slightly. Thank you for thinking so highly of us, Senior. The 4 of us brothers will definitely work hard. He hesitated for a moment as he spoke up to this point, and then he said, Senior, since you're not interested in taking disciples, then we'll be taking our leave. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left. Dao Ling and the others were slightly stunned, but they still left with Yi Xian in the end. Suddenly, the voice said, they're right outside. You'll be in danger if you leave now. Yi Xian nodded. I know. However, we'll probably drag Senior down if we stay here. Once that Tribulation Lord and the others behind him act against Senior. At that time, our consciences wouldn't be able to bear it. The voice suddenly roared with laughter. Little fellow, do you think I'm afraid of them? Yi Xian hesitated to speak. The voice chuckled, little fellow, just watch. I'll show you what a true expert is like. As soon as the voice finished speaking, a black shadow suddenly appeared in the sky outside the hall, and it looked down at the Tribulation Lord. Trash, like you said that you're invincible throughout the universe? Are you shameless? How dare you speak such arrogant words? A moment later, a huge palm swept down at an extremely swift speed, and the Tribulation Lord wasn't even able to react before he was blasted flying. Rumble. The Tribulation Lord was blasted over 3 kilometers away. As soon as he stopped, his body exploded apart into countless bolts of lightning that shot towards the surroundings. The Tribulation Lord was speechless. P.S. I don't dare to say anything else, but do all of you think that I'm on time? Is there anyone who's more stable and punctual than me? Chapter 2254. It had to be said that the Tribulation Lord was dumbfounded. What the hell was this? Who was this fellow in front of him? Why did he attack him? In the horizon, the phantom looked down at the Tribulation Lord hundreds of thousands of feet away. It disdainfully said, "What trash?" Tribulation Lord, at the entrance to the hall, Master Cloud looked up at the phantom, his expression calm. "You must be the primal god race's primordial divine tree soul." In the horizon, the phantom looked at Master Cloud and chuckled. To think you even investigated my origins so thoroughly. You aren't simple at all. Master Cloud chuckled. Primordial Divine Tree, our goal is only those 4 people. The Primordial Divine Tree lightly said, what does that have to do with me? Master Cloud nodded. Then I ask you to let them come out. The Primordial Divine Tree mocked, why should I? Master Cloud frowned. The Primordial Divine Tree sneered. What, you want to fight? Master Cloud sighed. We have always respected the primal god race. Primordial Divine Tree, we must obtain those 4 people. Can you not interfere? The Primordial Divine Tree laughed. Are you threatening me or begging me? After a moment of silence, Master Cloud nodded. I understand your attitude. With that, he turned and left. He didn't attack because he truly couldn't do anything to the Primordial Divine Tree. At this time, the distant Tribulation Lord trembled. Primordial Divine Tree, as far as I know, this is the first time we have met. Since this is the first time we have met, why did you hit me? The Primordial Divine Tree lightly said, if I want to hit you, I hit you. You don't agree? The Tribulation Lord fiercely said, was it that Yi Xian? Did he tell you to hit me? Yi Xian, the Primordial Divine Tree frowned. Why do you have to spout so much nonsense? If you don't agree, then hit me back. The Tribulation Lord's expression was incomparably fierce. He knew. It was definitely that bastard Yi Xian who was up to no good. That old bastard. On the side, Master Cloud glanced at the Tribulation Lord. Let's go. With that, he vanished with the Tribulation Lord. The Primordial Divine Tree returned to the hall. At this moment, the eyes of Yi Xian and the others were filled with admiration. Yi Xian said excitedly, Senior, that Tribulation Lord was like an ant in front of you. Senior, you are amazing. The Primordial God Tree laughed, it's not that I'm powerful, it's that the Tribulation Lord is too weak. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled bitterly. Senior, before this, us 4 brothers felt that there were very few in the world who could be a match for us. But now that we've met Senior, we finally know how weak we are. Sigh. We were shocked by Senior's invincible strength. The Primordial God Tree laughed, little guy, don't keep flattering me, I don't like it, haha. Yi Xian was speechless. Meanwhile, Dao Ling spoke abruptly, Senior, who's the power standing behind the Tribulation Lord? The Primordial God Tree frowned. Don't you know? Yi Xian nodded. I don't know. The Primordial God Tree fell silent. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment before he said, is it very strong? The Primordial God Tree said, very strong. They have a long history, even before my Primordial God race. Moreover, according to what I know, they've even devoured the people of the previous generations who possessed the destiny of the Great Tao. Yi Xian frowned. They've devoured the previous generations? The Primordial God Tree nodded. Yes. Yi Xian said in a low voice, is the destiny of the Great Tao so useless? It was actually killed by someone else. This Dedeabi is too cheap. Dedeabi. The Primordial God Tree laughed. Possessing the destiny of the Great Tao only means that one's destiny becomes extremely good. Apart from that, it doesn't mean anything. But there are some powerhouses that can ignore this so-called destiny, just like the Tribulation Lord and those people behind him. Yi Xian frowned. Senior, who are those people behind him? The Primordial God Tree fell silent. Yi Xian asked, you can't tell me? The Primordial God Tree said, the Immortal Mausoleum. It's a very, very ancient superfaction. When my Primordial God race was still around, we had dealings with them. In truth, I have some doubts. Logically speaking, although your Great Tao destiny is good, it shouldn't be of much use to existences like them. This is because they don't have the destiny of the Great Tao, so it's impossible for them to compete for it. Although the destiny of the Great Tao can be devoured, the effect isn't that great. Unless. Yi Xian suddenly said, unless they also have someone who possesses the destiny of the great Tao. The primordial god tree nodded. If they also have someone who possesses the destiny of the great Tao, then everything makes sense. As it spoke, it glanced at Yi Xian and the others. The four of you have been targeted by them. I'm afraid your days won't be too good. Yi Xian said in a low voice, just how many people possess the destiny of the great Tao? The primordial god tree smiled. I'm not sure about that. Yi Xian thought for a moment and then said, Senior, can you point us in the right direction? The primordial god tree fell silent. Yi Xian faintly smiled. I was rude. The primordial god tree said in a low voice, little fellow, to tell you the truth, the reason I stayed here is to seek a lucky chance for my primal god race. In the past, because of some special reasons, my race was destroyed. And in these past years, my people have always wanted to rebuild the primal god race and return to our ancestral land, Primordial City. But, because of some special reasons, we cannot return. As it spoke, it glanced at Yi Xian. Little fellow, I know you aren't ordinary. If you agree to bring my primal god race's people back to the primordial god race in the future, then I will bring you 4 brothers to see the souls of my primal god race's ancestors and have them help you 4 brothers. But, I must remind you that once you agree, that is the same as accepting an even greater karma. In the past, my primal god race's strength was evenly matched with the immortal mausoleum. Hearing this, Yi Xian and the others fell silent. Evenly matched. And the primal god race had still been destroyed. What did this mean? It meant that the primal god race had provoked an extremely terrifying influence or powerhouse. Yi Xian turned to look at Dao Ling and Shirtian. Both of them were silent. Yi Xian smiled and said, if you aren't going to say anything, then state your stance. Dao Ling hesitated for a moment and then said, Brother Yi, you make the decision. Yi Xian looked at Shirtian. Shirtian nodded. Brother Yi, you decide. Yi Xian looked at Sky Forsaken. Sky Forsaken hesitated for a moment and then said, just give me the meat. Everyone, Yi Xian laughed and then turned to look at the primordial god tree. Senior, we will make this deal. The primordial god tree looked straight at Yi Xian. Are you sure? Yi Xian nodded. Let the future speak for itself. Living in the present is the most important thing. The primordial god tree was silent for a moment and then said, follow me. After saying that, it turned and walked towards the small hall. Yi Xian hurriedly led Dao Ling and the other 2 to follow. On the way, Shirtian said in a deep voice, Brother Yi, why do I feel like we are getting weaker and weaker? It wasn't like this before. Dao Ling also nodded. Yes, before I met Brother Yi, I was already invincible for many years. Ever since I met Brother Yi, I feel weaker by the day. As he said that, he glanced at Yi Xian and then said, Brother Yi, what about you? Yi Xian sternly said, I am the same. Before we were together, I was always invincible. Along the way, I swept away everything and never met a worthy opponent. Dao Ling hesitated for a moment and then said, really? Yi Xian's face darkened. I am a swordsman. Do you think I would lie? Dao Ling curled his lips. You are a hammer swordsman. After spending time with Yi Xian, he finally realized this. Although Brother Yi was a swordsman, the things he did were completely different from what he imagined a swordsman to be. Shirtian suddenly said, Brother Yi, I feel that this matter with the primordial god race is not as simple as it seems. Yi Xian nodded. I know, but we have no choice. No choice. Shirtian was silent. As Yi Xian said, the 4 of them had no other choice. Before long, everyone entered the small hall. There were some statues in the small hall and the entire hall was very quiet. The primordial god tree slightly bowed towards the leading statue. Patriarch. Kacha. The statues suddenly shattered and an old man appeared in front of Yi Xian and the others. The old man's long hair draped over his shoulders. He wore a large and luxurious robe and there was a dignified air between his eyebrows. The old man looked at Yi Xian and the others in front of him. Those who possess the destiny of the great Tao. Yi Xian bowed, "Greetings, senior." The old man was silent. The primordial god tree hesitated for a moment and then said, "Patriarch," the old man said in a soft voice, "them." As he spoke, he looked at Yi Xian. "Besides fighting, what do you want us to help you with?" Yi Xian thought for a moment and then said, "Increase our strength." The old man nodded. "What else?" Yi Xian blinked. "Give us some money." The old man faintly smiled. "Money?" Yi Xian nodded. "And equipment, of course. If you don't have it then we won't force you." The old man said, "I do." As he spoke, he opened his palm and a pitch-black sword appeared in front of Yi Xian. The sword was 4 feet long and 2 fingers wide. It was pitch black all over. Yi Xian blinked. "Senior, this is?" The old man smiled. "The primordial god sword, the #1 divine sword of my primal god race. The blade is forged from divine time metal and can increase the power of time several times over. Not just that, but it also contains the soul of my primal guardian beast. This beast has already transcended time in the past. With its help, the power of your sword skills will multiply." Yi Xian said in a low voice, "Are you giving it to me?" The old man nodded. Yi Xian fell silent. The old man suddenly looked at Shirtian. He opened his palm and a pair of armed guards appeared in front of Shirtian. Primordial god arms. These arms were forged from the arms of an ancient variant beast, the Tongbi divine ape. These arms contain the terrifying strength of a divine ape. They suit you very well. Shirtian fell silent. He didn't take them. The old man then looked at Dao Ling. He opened his palm and a black stone appeared in front of Dao Ling. This is a primordial god stone. It can greatly increase the power of one's soul. When you cast a spell, use it as a medium. Not only will the power increase, but the consumption of your soul will also be minimal. Dao Ling didn't take them either. The old man then looked at Tianqi. He hesitated for a moment, then turned to look at Yi Xian. "Are you sure you want him to follow you?" Yi Xian glanced at Tianqi and said, "What's wrong?" The old man sighed. "His background isn't simple. If he follows you, I'm afraid he will bring you endless trouble in the future." Yi Xian smiled. "I'm not afraid." The old man was puzzled. "Why?" Yi Xian picked up the primordial god sword and said, "There's no need to worry about too many debts." The old man. Chapter 2255. Karma. Yi Xian knew very well that if he couldn't get through this, everything else would be for naught. He had to get through this first. As if he'd thought of something, Yi Xian said in a low voice, "Senior, you said Tianqi's origins aren't simple. Can you tell me in detail?" The old man shook his head. "No." Yi Xian was speechless. The old man glanced at Tianqi who was still eating meat, and he said in a low voice, "His origins are very extraordinary. As for exactly what his origins are, I'm unable to tell you because I don't want to cause trouble for myself." Yi Xian nodded. "Understood." The old man seemed to have thought of something. He opened his palm and a set of armor appeared in his hand. The old man said in a low voice, "Primal god armor, the strongest defensive divine equipment of my primal god race." As it spoke, the armor slowly floated in front of Tianqi. However, Tianqi was unmoved. In his eyes, there was only meat. Yi Xian hurriedly said, "Tianqi, quickly pick it up. This is good stuff." Tianqi shook his head, "You can't eat it." Yi Xian's face darkened. "You're really a foodie." As he spoke, he picked up the primeval divine armor. walked over to Tianqi, and then placed it in Tianqi's hand. When you fight in the future, utilize this treasure, and you'll become even more formidable. Tianqi hesitated for a moment and said, Really? Yi Xian nodded. I'm not lying. Tianqi nodded, and then he put the armor away. As soon as the armor entered his hand, it transformed into a strand of black light that entered his body. Boom! Within Tianqi's body, a horrifying aura suddenly swept out. The old man gently waved his right hand, and the aura was immediately dispersed. The old man's right hand suddenly opened and 4 spatial rings slowly floated in front of Yi Xian and the others. Yi Xian glanced at them and was shocked. Each spatial ring actually contained 1 million universe veins. 1 million. Dao Ling and Shi Tian looked at each other, their eyes filled with shock. Weren't the primal god race far too heroic? Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. Senior, you're too generous. I'm panicking. The old man smiled and said, What are you afraid of? In any case, there's no need to worry about more debts, isn't there? Yi Xian nodded. Yes. As he spoke, he put away the spatial ring and said, Senior, your request is for the 4 of us to lead your primal god race clansmen to Primeval City in the future? The old man nodded. Yes. Yi Xian asked, Where are your people? The old man looked at Yi Xian. They are in a very, very safe place. In the future, when your ability reaches a certain level, someone will come looking for you and make you fulfill today's promise. Yi Xian nodded. I understand. The old man smiled faintly. Little fella, we can't openly help you with your matter with the Immortal Mausoleum, but we can secretly help you. Right now, we can help you reach beyond the age of time. Yi Xian was a little curious. Senior, what realm is above flowing time? The old man said, Transcend time. As his voice fell, he waved his right hand and dozens of phantoms appeared. The old man said in a low voice, These are the ancestors of my primal god race. Now, we will pass on all of our inheritances to you. As for whether or not you can reach beyond the age of time in a short period of time, that will depend on your own good fortune. Yi Xian said, Then the Immortal Mausoleum. The old man said, 3 days. We will help you delay them for 3 days. After 3 days, we will no longer interfere. My apologies, but because of our current state, we cannot wage an all-out war with the Immortal Mausoleum. We can only help you within the limits of our abilities. Yi Xian nodded. I understand. The old man said, Then let's begin. Yi Xian turned to look at Dao Ling and the others. Let's compete and see who is faster. Dao Ling laughed. That's exactly what I was thinking. Shi Tian also nodded. Sure. The 3 of them suddenly looked at Heaven Forsaken, who was still eating meat. Heaven Forsaken had an indifferent expression, as if he didn't even know what he was doing. Yi Xian and the others were left speechless. This fellow's heart was too big. The old man suddenly said, Then let's begin. Yi Xian nodded. Okay. The old man turned to look at the primal god race ancestor souls and nodded. Soon, everyone began to pass the inheritances to Yi Xian and the others. Transcending time in 3 days? In truth, the 4 of them didn't have any confidence. But they had no path of retreat. Even if they didn't have confidence, they had to brace themselves and do it. At the side, Heaven Forsaken was about to leave when Yi Xian hurriedly stopped him. What are you doing? Heaven Forsaken shook his head. It's not fun. Yi Xian's face darkened. Cultivate according to what they say. Once you succeed, I will give you meat to eat. A lot of meat. Heaven Forsaken hesitated for a moment and then said, Really? Yi Xian nodded. Really? Heaven Forsaken immediately nodded. Okay. With that said, he went to receive the inheritance. Yi Xian was speechless. What a glutton. Without thinking too much about it, Yi Xian also began to receive the inheritance. The old man and the primordial god tree left the hall. The old man sat on the stone steps and looked into the distant horizon in silence. The primordial god tree said in a low voice, "Patriarch, are you worried?" The old man said softly, "That youth isn't simple." The primordial god tree nodded. "All four of them aren't simple." The old man chuckled. "What do you think of the youth in the lead?" "That fellow called Yi Xian." The primordial god tree was silent for a moment before saying, "What thick skin." The old man laughed. "Is that it?" The primordial god tree shook its head and smiled. "Patriarch, what are you trying to say?" The old man said softly, "Do you see the other three fellows? They're all led by that fellow." The primordial god tree fell silent. The old man shook his head. "That little fellow looks flashy on the surface, but he's actually very meticulous and knows how to read people's minds. Of course, the most important thing is that the power behind him isn't simple. I fear it's no weaker than that heaven-forsaken youth." The primordial god tree said, "Patriarch, is that heaven-forsaken from that race?" The old man nodded. Hearing this, the primordial god tree's expression instantly became solemn. "He's actually from that race." The old man smiled. "I didn't expect that either. As far as I know, a super genius appeared in that race and shocked everyone for a while. Unfortunately, for some reason, that genius suddenly disappeared." At this point, he shook his head. "Now it seems that heaven-forsaken is that youth from back then, and he ended up here," the primordial god tree said solemnly. "If he really was framed and ended up here, then Yi Xian brought him," the old man said softly. "That's great karma." The primordial god tree fell silent. The old man suddenly smiled. "This Yi Xian is quite capable. They were originally fated to fight, but he actually gathered them together. The immortal mausoleum is probably in trouble this time." The primordial god tree frowned slightly. "Trouble? With their current strength, it's far from enough to threaten the immortal mausoleum." The old man smiled. "It's indeed not enough now, but what about the future? These four fellows are monstrous beyond our imagination. Let's wait and see." Just as the primordial god tree was about to speak, he suddenly looked up into the horizon. Three powerful auras were slowly pressing down from the horizon. The primordial god tree narrowed his eyes, and a fierce light flashed through them. He was about to attack but was stopped by the old man. The old man smiled. "Let's talk." At this moment, Master Cloud, Tribulation Lord, and a beautiful woman appeared in front of the two. The beautiful woman sized up the old man and smiled. "I presume you are the patriarch of the primal god race, Primordial Yuan." The old man smiled. "I am." The beautiful woman faintly smiled. "Patriarch Yuan, my immortal mausoleum has no grudge with your primal god race, so I don't think there's any need for such displeasure. What do you think?" Primordial Yuan nodded. "I think so too." The beautiful woman looked at Primordial Yuan, her smile still on her face. "Then I ask Patriarch Yuan to hand over those four people. I will be eternally grateful." Primordial Yuan thought for a moment and then said, "We made a deal with that youth. 3 days. 3 days from now, he will leave." 3 days. The beautiful woman's eyes narrowed. "Patriarch Primordial Yuan, what do you mean by this?" Primordial Yuan smiled. "I don't mean anything else. I just hope that you can wait 3 days. 3 days from now, that youth will leave. At that time, you can resolve the matter between you and him. We won't interfere at all." The beautiful woman chuckled. "Patriarch Primordial Yuan, are you joking with me?" Primordial Yuan laughed. "If you think it's impossible, then let's fight." "Fight." The beautiful woman's smile gradually turned cold. "Patriarch Primordial Yuan, those four people are useless to you, but they are extremely useful to us. We must obtain those four people." Immemorial Yuan said with a smile, "Sir, I just said that we made a deal with them. 3 days later, they will leave this place. As for the grudge between you and them, my primal god race has no interest in interfering. Of course, if you aren't willing to wait 3 days, then you can attack now. However, I must remind you that with your strength, if you want to fight me, then you will likely be beaten to death by me. The beautiful woman's complexion suddenly turned ugly. Primordial Yuan. The beautiful woman didn't attack. The person in front of her wasn't from the same era as her. This person was once the powerful patriarch of the primal god race. His strength was definitely above hers. At this time, Primordial Yuan said again, 3 days. Just 3 days. Although my primal god race has declined, can the immortal mausoleum not give us face? The beautiful woman pondered for a moment and said, all right, I'll give you 3 days. With that, she turned and left. Primordial Yuan looked at the horizon and faintly smiled. Outside. The beautiful woman's complexion was extremely ugly. Master Yun said in a low voice, there's something fishy about this. The Calamity Lord nodded. It's very strange. Logically speaking, the primal god race has no reason to help them. But, as he spoke up to hear, he looked at the beautiful woman. Revered Mist, can we not give them 3 days? The beautiful woman was silent for a moment and said, the primal god race cannot be underestimated. As he spoke, he turned and said in a soft voice, 3 days, we'll give them 3 days. I want to see what they can do in 3 days. 1 day later. Inside the primordial hall. A terrifying aura suddenly appeared. Someone had broken through. In the corner, Yi Xian opened his eyes and looked into the distance. When he saw the person who had broken through, he was stunned. It wasn't Dao Ling or Shi Tian. It was Tian Qi. He broke through just like that. Yi Xian and the other two were stunned. In the distance, Tian Qi suddenly walked in front of Yi Xian. Meat, a lot of meat, Yi Xian. P.S. I'm going to study this month. What a pain in the ass. I've been working hard to save up manuscripts. I won't ask for votes this month. I'm too ashamed to ask for votes. I'm too ashamed. Every time I ask for votes at the end, my conscience will condemn me. Chapter 2256. Yi Xian was speechless. Could this fellow have cultivated to transcend time so quickly because he wanted to eat meat? Needless to say, Yi Xian was quite shocked at this moment. Transcend time. Tianqi had actually used such a short period of time to reach transcend time. That wasn't just an ordinary level of terrifying. It wasn't normal. Meanwhile, Primeval Yuan appeared here. He glanced at Tianqi and said softly, his heart is very simple. The simpler it is, the faster his cultivation will be. Yi Xian fell silent. At this moment, he recalled something Qin Guan had once said. There are no obstacles to cultivation. It's the human heart that is too complicated and has too many thoughts. That's why there are obstacles to cultivation. Obviously, Tianqi's heart was very simple and pure. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. He took out a roasted leg of lamb and handed it to Tianqi. Tianqi was overjoyed and took a bite. Meanwhile, Primeval Yuan suddenly said, all of you should speed up as well. There are only 2 more days left. Yi Xian nodded. The inheritances continued. Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground while the countless inheritances of the primeval race flashed through his mind. Time. Time was the passing of time. Was it the past? Strictly speaking, it was. The river of time was the product of the accumulation of time over a long period of time. Was it difficult to transcend time? Of course it was. Because one had to gain complete control of the river of time before they could transcend time. Fortunately, there were many cultivation techniques within those inheritances. These ancient cultivation techniques could allow them to grasp the river of time quickly. At this moment, Yi Xian sighed with emotion. Independent cultivators couldn't compare to such extraordinary powers at all. Such extraordinary powers had their own inheritances. Many realms were as difficult as ascending to the heavens in the outside world, but they had extremely detailed cultivation techniques here. It was so detailed that it made one's scalp go numb. Just like the old saying, what you need to spend your entire life pondering and pursuing is something others are born with. There was no comparison at all. Yi Xian shook his head and stopped thinking about it. He started to focus on controlling the river of time. As he studied the river of time, a thought suddenly arose in Yi Xian's mind. Why transcend time? Why couldn't it fuse with time? Without detachment, I am both for the years. Thinking of this, Yi Xian decided to give it a try. But soon, Yi Xian was a little depressed. It was because he discovered that he couldn't merge with the river of time at all. The other party didn't care about him at all. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly missed the green profound sword. If it was the green profound sword, it would definitely fuse with him. However, Yi Xian did not intend to give up. After a short moment of silence, Yi Xian suddenly said, "River of Time, I know you're intelligent. Since you're intelligent, can we talk?" No response. Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, "According to my understanding, even though you're time, you're not absolutely safe. There are countless great experts in this world that can destroy you. Right?" There was still no response. Yi Xian continued, "You should have met my younger sister, right? Time, if you fuse with me, your fate will be tied to mine. As long as I don't die, no one can destroy you. In other words, if you choose to fuse with me, my backer will be your backer." Still no response. Yi Xian smiled slightly, "Since you're unwilling, then forget it." Before he could finish speaking, Yi Xian suddenly discovered that the river of time around him suddenly trembled. In the next moment, the river of time actually took the initiative to fuse with him. Seeing this scene, Yi Xian was overjoyed. Damn it! It actually worked. Actually, he had just wanted to fool it casually, but he hadn't expected it to actually succeed. Life was really full of surprises. Wonderful. Yi Xian hurriedly took the initiative to fuse with the river of time. When he took the initiative to fuse with the river of time, Yi Xian was shocked to the extreme. He was like a tiny fish, and the river of time was like a vast ocean. Only when he entered the ocean did he realize how tiny he was compared to the river of time. Transcend time? Yi Xian suddenly discovered a problem. The so-called transcending time didn't mean surpassing the flow of time. It meant that the other party wasn't bound by the flow of time. In front of the river of time, the other party was still very tiny. This was because the power of time was everywhere. Transcending was not surpassing it. Just like a fish in the sea, if it left the sea, it could also be said that it had transcended the sea, but it couldn't be said that it was more amazing than the sea. Thinking of this, Yi Xian suddenly became enlightened. Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. He began to earnestly fuse with the river of time. Like this, the third day passed. In the grand hall, Dao Ling and Shirtian suddenly opened their eyes at the same time. A terrifying aura erupted from their bodies, but this aura was instantly retracted by the two. The two looked at each other and then laughed. Transcending time. With the help of the primal god race ancestors, they had directly transcended time. As if thinking of something, the two turned to look at Yi Xian not too far away. At this time, Yi Xian was still quietly sitting, like an old monk in meditation. Both of them frowned. He still hasn't broken through? Right at this moment, Primeval Yuan suddenly said, "How do the two of you feel now?" Dao Ling grinned, "I feel like I'm invincible." Ha! Primeval Yuan shook his head and smiled, "It's very normal. When I transcended time for the first time, I was very arrogant as well." Dao Ling said in a low voice, "Senior, my brother Yi." Primeval Yuan glanced at Yi Xian and fell silent. Dao Ling and Shirtian exchanged glances, and they were both slightly puzzled. Why hasn't he broken through? Right at this moment, Primeval Yuan suddenly said, "Young Master Yi, time's up." Yi Xian didn't reply. Primeval Yuan's expression froze. This little fellow isn't trying to act shamelessly, right? Dao Ling hesitated for a moment and said, "Senior, he might be at a critical moment. Can you give him a little more time?" Primeval Yuan was about to speak when a voice suddenly resounded from outside, "Patriarch Primeval, 3 days are up." Primeval Yuan fell silent. "Time's up." Primeval Yuan gazed at Yi Xian, but Yi Xian still didn't reply. Dao Ling intended to say something when Shi Tian spoke abruptly, "Senior, the 3 of us brothers will go stop them and allow Brother Yi to stay here and continue cultivating. What do you think?" Primeval Yuan fell silent. Shi Tian spoke abruptly, "We'll take Yi Xian out." As he spoke, he bowed deeply to Primeval Yuan. "We 4 brothers will definitely remember what the primeval race has done for us today. If the primeval race needs anything in the future, we 4 brothers will definitely do our best to help. Senior, we'll meet again." As soon as he finished speaking, he took Yi Xian with him and left. Dao Ling bowed slightly, and then he turned around and left as well. Tian Qi glanced at Primeval Yuan, and then he withdrew a piece of roasted meat. He stuffed it into Primeval Yuan's hand, and then he turned around and ran. Primeval Yuan didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he gazed at the roasted meat in his hand. The primeval god tree spoke in a low voice, "Patriarch." Primeval Yuan said softly, "We can only help them this much. If we continue to help, we'll have to face the immortal mausoleum head-on. If it was in the past, even if we have to face the immortal mausoleum head-on, I wouldn't hesitate. But now..." As he spoke, he shook his head, "We've already declined. If we really face the immortal mausoleum head-on, us old fellows don't matter, but what about our clansmen who are hiding in the dark?" As he spoke, he looked into the distance and said softly, "Our abilities are limited. Even if we have good karma, we have to stop." The primeval god tree nodded, "I understand." As if he thought of something, he suddenly looked outside, "Then what about young Master Yi?" After a long silence, Primeval Yuan said, "I'm also very puzzled." As he spoke, he looked outside, "I hope they can get through this. Otherwise, our investment will be wasted." Outside. The moment Dao Ling, Shi Tian, and Tian Qi brought Yi Xian out, they were locked onto by 3 terrifying auras. It was Master Yun, Culpa Lord, and Supreme Mist. Supreme Mist looked at Dao Ling and the other 2 with a calm expression. The Culpa Lord's gaze fell on Yi Xian with an unfriendly expression. Supreme Mist sized up Dao Ling and the other 2. In the next moment, a cold light flashed in his eyes, "Transcend time." Hearing this, Master Yun and the Culpa Lord's expressions instantly turned ugly. These 3 actually transcended time in such a short period of time? Supreme Mist looked at the primeval god palace in the distance and her expression was terrifyingly gloomy. She naturally knew that the reason these people could transcend time in such a short period of time was because of the primeval god race. Otherwise, Yi Xian and the others definitely couldn't transcend time in such a short period of time. At this moment, the Culpa Lord suddenly pointed at Yi Xian in the distance and said, "He doesn't seem to have broken through." Supreme Mist retracted her gaze and looked at Yi Xian in the distance. She frowned, "He hasn't broken through." Below, Dao Ling suddenly smiled, "Everyone, can we talk?" Supreme Mist looked at Dao Ling, "Talk about what?" Dao Ling smiled, "What do you think of the 4 of us?" Supreme Mist's expression was calm, "What do you want to say?" Dao Ling said seriously, "Don't you think we are very outstanding? Forgive me for being blunt, but there are no more outstanding geniuses and monsters than us 4 brothers. You guys are targeting us. If we take revenge on you in the future when we grow up, won't you guys be in trouble?" Supreme Mist nodded, "It will indeed be troublesome." Dao Ling hurriedly said, "So, why are you guys targeting us? Now, if you apologize to us and compensate us with something, the grudge between us will be over. What do you think?" Supreme Mist looked at Dao Ling. Are you trying to trick me? Dao Ling, Supreme Mist said again, you're right. If you guys really grow up, you can indeed bring us a lot of trouble. So, we have to kill you before you guys grow up. As she said this, she looked at Dao Ling. Thank you for your reminder. Kill. As her voice fell, Master Yun, who was beside her, dashed out. At the side, Dao Ling's expression froze. Shi Tian sighed softly, you idiot. If you don't have a brain like Brother Yi, don't try to trick us. Dao Ling. 7017K. Chapter 2257. At the instant that Master Yun charged over, a vicious look flashed through Tian Chi's eyes. In the next moment, he charged at Master Yun. Bang! An explosion resounded in the sky, and then both Master Yun and Tian Chi retreated explosively at the same time. The two of them retreated several tens of thousands of feet away. After Master Yun stopped moving, he gazed at Tian Chi with a wisp of a solemn expression in his eyes, and he was shocked. What a terrifying physical strength. Venerable Mist suddenly said, he's a demon beast. Watch out. Master Yun nodded slightly, and then he vanished on the spot. Hiss. Space suddenly split apart. A wisp of ferocity flashed through Tian Chi's eyes, and then he clenched his right fist and punched forward. Rumble. A huge explosion resounded, and then the heavens and the earth were blasted apart. This time, Tian Chi retreated by almost 300 kilometers, and he just stopped when the space behind him collapsed into pieces. Master Yun gazed at Tian Chi with a calm expression, again. As soon as he finished speaking, he charged at Tian Chi. Tian Chi clenched his right fist tightly, and then he shot into the sky and smashed against Master Yun. He was going head-on against him. On the other side, Dao Ling glanced at Venerable Mist and the Tribulation Lord, and then he said, Brother Tian, who do you choose? Shi Tian immediately pointed at the Tribulation Lord. Dao Ling's face froze. Everyone could discern that Venerable Mist was even more terrifying. Shi Tian glanced at Yi Xian, who was still meditating in the distance, and then he said, that Tribulation Lord's gaze has been fixed on Brother Yi. Obviously, he intends to kill Brother Yi. Be careful. Dao Ling nodded, and then he gazed at Venerable Mist. Do you want to fight me? If you don't want to fight me, you can fight my brother Tian. Shi Tian was speechless. Venerable Mist stared at Dao Ling. I want to fight you. Dao Ling was puzzled. Why? Venerable Mist's expression was calm. I hate flashy people. So, I want to beat you to death. As she spoke, she suddenly vanished on the spot. Dao Ling's pupils constricted, and then he pressed his palms together. In an instant, an all-manifestation Dharma body that was over 30 kilometers long appeared behind him. He didn't dare act carelessly or underestimate such a terrifying Venerable Mist. Dao Ling suddenly roared, Die. As soon as he finished speaking, he slammed his right palm down. Boom. Behind him, the Dharma body, which was tens of thousands of meters tall, suddenly slammed its palm down. Boom. Wherever the giant palm passed, the space would burn and be annihilated. Revered Mist watched the palm strike with a calm expression. She flicked her sleeve. Boom. The enormous palm was directly shattered. At the same time, Dao Ling retreated explosively for over 100 kilometers, and the all-creation Dharma body behind him had already vanished. Dao Ling was a little confused. Damn it. I was beaten up right after transcending time. Dao Ling looked at Venerable Mist in the distance. Venerable Mist's expression was calm. A Dharma body of all creations. Why are you still playing with such a low-level thing? How could you entrust your power to the Dharmakaya? What are you thinking? Dao Ling took a deep look at Supreme Mist, then turned to look at Shi Tian. Shi Tian's eyelid twitched. Don't look at me. I want to follow Lord Robber. As soon as he finished speaking, he charged towards the Tribulation Lord. Dao Ling's expression froze. The Culpa Lord's face remained emotionless when he saw Shirtian charge over, but his gaze was terrifyingly icy cold. Actually, he wasn't much weaker than Supreme Mist and Master Yun in the past. The reason why he was so weak now was because Qingguan had destroyed his myriad calamity body. When he thought of this, he felt his heart ache. All calamity body. All calamity body. He had cultivated for tens of thousands of years to achieve it. Yet that woman had beaten him into nothingness. When he thought of that woman, his scalp went numb. The Culpa Lord didn't think too much about it and charged towards Shirtian. In an instant, countless tribulation lightning appeared in the surroundings. Shirtian didn't dare to be careless when facing the Culpa Lord. In the battle, the one who suffered the most was Dao Ling. When he fought against Supreme Mist, he was simply taking a beating. At this moment, he didn't even have the strength to fight back. He could only passively take a beating. Tian Qi was also being suppressed by Master Yun. Although Tian Qi's body was extremely terrifying, his combat style was too simple. He was at a disadvantage when facing an expert of Master Yun's level. However, Master Yun couldn't do anything to Tian Qi for the time being. Because Tian Qi's body was too terrifying. In particular, he still had the primal god armor that the primal god race had given him. When Shirtian fought with the Culpa Lord, he was also suppressed by the Culpa Lord. After all, he had just transcended time and couldn't compare with the powerhouse of the Culpa Lord's level. And the one who suffered the most was Dao Ling. He was simply being beaten up. In the distance, in the Grand Hall, the primal god tree said softly, "They aren't a match for Supreme Mist's group of 3. Primal Yuan was silent. The primal god tree said in a low voice, "In at most a quarter of an hour, Dao Ling will be killed by Supreme Mist. Once Dao Ling is killed, then neither Shirtian nor Tian Qi will live." Primal Yuan looked at Yi Xian, who was still sitting in the distance. It was unknown what he was thinking. The primal god tree shook its head. Even if Yi Xian makes a breakthrough now, it is meaningless. Even if the 4 of them join forces, they still won't be a match for Supreme Mist's group of 3. After a moment of silence, Primal Yuan said softly, "That will depend on their own good fortune." The primal god tree said in a low voice, "Are we really not going to help?" Primal Yuan smiled bitterly, "What can we do to help? If we help, it means that we will be waging war against the immortal mausoleum. How can the current us resist the immortal mausoleum?" The primal god tree sighed. The current primal god race indeed didn't have the ability to contend with the immortal mausoleum. At this moment, Primal Yuan looked up at the distant horizon and said softly, "It might be over." Bang! In the distant starry skies, the starry skies suddenly exploded. In the next moment, a figure frantically retreated. It was Dao Ling. Dao Ling had retreated hundreds of thousands of feet. After Dao Ling stopped, a trace of blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. In the distance, Supreme Mist looked at Dao Ling with a calm expression, "You don't seem to be much." Dao Ling wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He looked at the distant Supreme Mist and slowly closed his eyes. He opened his hands and in the next moment, a divine stone appeared between his eyebrows. Primal God Stone. Suddenly, the space around Dao Ling trembled. Dao Ling slowly clenched his right hand. In the next moment, he suddenly soared into the sky. In an instant, the starry skies boiled. With the help of the primal god stone, a Wanxiang avatar that was hundreds of thousands of feet long appeared behind him. The moment this Wanxiang avatar appeared, a terrifying pressure instantly swept across the entire starry skies. Then, the starry skies within a radius of millions of miles trembled violently as if there was an earthquake. It was incomparably terrifying. In the distance, Supreme Mist looked at Dao Ling with a calm expression. "The source of power comes from within, not from outside." Dao Ling suddenly turned his head and looked at Yi Xian, who was sitting quietly below. He said in a trembling voice, "Brother Yi, how much longer do you need? Give me a definite answer." Yi Xian was silent. Dao Ling's expression froze. He didn't say anything else. He suddenly leaped up and directly fused with the Wanxiang avatar behind him. Boom! In an instant, the Wanxiang avatar violently trembled. In an instant, a terrifying aura directly locked onto Supreme Mist in the distance. Supreme Mist frowned slightly. At this moment, she finally felt a little dangerous. Supreme Mist stared at Dao Ling. You're overexerting yourself. In the starry skies, Dao Ling took a deep breath. He was indeed overexerting himself. He had no choice but to do so. If he didn't do so, he wouldn't be a match for Supreme Mist at all. He had to buy some time for Yi Xian. Dao Ling collected his thoughts. He looked at Supreme Mist in the distance and a ferocious glint flashed in his eyes. In the next moment, he directly disappeared on the spot. Boom! The Wanxiang avatar that was hundreds of thousands of feet long swept across the starry skies and directly collided with Supreme Mist. The powerful force seemed to be able to crush this part of the universe. It was extremely terrifying. In the distance, Supreme Mist squinted her eyes. She suddenly opened her right hand and gently swept it forward. Pust! The spacetime suddenly split open. A black light suddenly shot into the sky and met the Wanxiang avatar. Rumble! In the blink of an eye, the ray of black light was obliterated, and the enormous all-elephant's Dharma body trembled violently before it exploded into pieces. A strand of terrifying energy suddenly erupted from the battlefield. Rumble! Supreme Mist retreated explosively for thousands of feet while Dao Ling retreated for hundreds of thousands of feet. As soon as he stopped, he spat out a few mouthfuls of blood. He was extremely weak. In the distance, Supreme Mist glanced at Dao Ling with a trace of seriousness in her eyes. Needless to say, the person before her was indeed monstrous. Under normal circumstances, it was impossible for him to challenge her at a higher level. After all, she, Supreme Mist, was once a monstrous person. Challenging others at a higher level was a common occurrence. How could others challenge her at a higher level? How difficult would that be? However, this Dao Ling before her could fight her. In the distance, Dao Ling wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and then grinned. One more time. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly leaped up. In the starry skies, he suddenly put his palms together. In an instant, hundreds of illusory figures appeared behind him. He suddenly slammed his palms down, and dozens of illusory figures slammed down simultaneously. In the distance, Supreme Mist was expressionless. She suddenly flicked her sleeves. With this movement, the entire starry skies seemed to be lifted up. Rumble! In an instant, a terrifying power swept through the starry skies. Dao Ling was directly thrown hundreds of thousands of feet away by this terrifying power. As soon as he stopped, his physical body was immediately destroyed. Not only that, but his soul also became extremely illusory. That strike just now almost directly obliterated his soul. Dao Ling turned his head and looked into the distance. At that moment, Tianqi and Shi Tian were already being suppressed. Dao Ling then looked at Yi Xian, who was sitting quietly in the distance. He said softly, "Brother Yi, if you still don't wake up, we can only be brothers in our next lives." In the distance, Supreme Mist was expressionless. Even if he wakes up now, what can he do? As she spoke, she slowly clenched her right hand. A terrifying power suddenly condensed in her right hand. Dao Ling took a deep breath and said softly, "Brother Yi, tell me honestly, are you already awake?" Yi Xian did not reply. Dao Ling said with a trembling voice, "Brother Yi, let's not joke around. Hurry up and get up. If you still don't get up, we'll all be killed." Yi Xian still did not reply. Dao Ling still wanted to say something, but Yi Xian suddenly stood up. Seeing this, Dao Ling was overjoyed. "Brother Yi?" Yi Xian glanced at the horizon and said softly, "I understand." After that, he turned and left. Dao Ling was stunned. Then, he said, Brother Yi, where are you going? Yi Xian did not even turn his head. I'm going to cultivate in seclusion. Brother Dao Ling, help me hold them off for another 3 days. 3 days later, I'll come back and find you. After he finished speaking, he had already disappeared. Dao Ling's face instantly turned pale. 3 days later, come back and collect my corpse. P.S. Those with tickets, please give me a nod. Thank you for your support. Chapter 2258. Did he really leave? Seeing Yi Xian disappear, Dao Ling was dumbfounded as if he was struck by lightning. From afar, Venerable Mist sneered, this is the person you want to protect with your life? You. As she said that, her pupils suddenly contracted. She turned around and blocked with her arm. Boom! A wave of sword light suddenly erupted from her arm. Kaboom! Venerable Mist retreated tens of thousands of feet away. As soon as she stopped, a shadow suddenly appeared. It wasn't Yi Xian, but Dao Ling who was beside her. A fist flew towards Venerable Mist's face. Venerable Mist's eyes flashed with hostility. She flicked her sleeves. Kaboom! In front of her, time and space collapsed and was destroyed. At that moment, a sword ray appeared behind her without any warning. Venerable Mist's body suddenly shook and she appeared tens of thousands of feet away. A sword slashed through the air. After Venerable Mist stopped, she lifted her head and looked at Yi Xian who was tens of thousands of feet away. Sneak attack? From afar, Yi Xian smiled faintly. Yes. Venerable Mist looked at Yi Xian. You are a swordsman. Don't you think it's shameful to do this? Yi Xian asked back, you have such a high realm, but you bully us. Don't you think it's shameful? Venerable Mist smiled faintly. You have a glib tongue. As soon as she said that, she suddenly pointed at Yi Xian from afar. Boom! A fingerprint suddenly swept across the field and hit Yi Xian. From afar, Yi Xian unsheathed his sword and slashed. Kaboom! The fingerprint shattered immediately. Seeing that, Venerable Mist frowned slightly. You haven't transcended time. Yi Xian smiled faintly. Transcended time? Only ordinary people like you would cultivate realms. I, Yi Xian, don't cultivate realms, understand? Venerable Mist looked at Yi Xian. Don't cultivate realms? Are you kidding me? Yi Xian was just about to speak when Shirtian suddenly said from the side, Brother Yi. Let's not chat for now. Can you deal with that woman first, and then come back to help? Yi Xian glanced at Shirtian. At this moment, Shirtian was being suppressed by the Tribulation Lord, and many parts of Shirtian's body had been charred by lightning. He was in a rather miserable state. Only Tian Qi was slightly better. His physical body was simply too terrifying. Even though Yunshi was suppressing him, he was unable to do anything to him. Yi Xian retracted his gaze and looked at Venerable Mist in the distance. Venerable Mist smiled and said, he's right. If you want to save them, you have to get rid of me first. Yi Xian suddenly turned his head to look at Dao Ling, who was next to him. What are you looking at? Go and heal your wounds first. Dao Ling was stunned for a moment before he hurriedly nodded. All right. Brother Yi, you can do it. With that, he turned around and vanished into the distance. Yi Xian looked at Supreme Mist in silence. Kill this woman? That wasn't very realistic. Even though he'd fused completely with the River of Time, he hadn't learned how to fully control it. So, he was only barely able to resist this woman. But if this continued, then Shirtian and Tian Qi would be in danger. Risking his life? If risking his life was of any use, then he would definitely do so. But the problem was that he couldn't kill this woman even if he risked his life. Yi Xian thought for a moment, and then he opened his palm. The dark heaven token appeared in his hand, and he activated it. In the next moment, the masked old man appeared in front of him. The masked old man was instantly shocked and he saw Supreme Mist and the others. He gazed at Yi Xian and spoke with a trembling voice, "Young Master Yi." Yi Xian grinned. "Don't be nervous. I didn't ask you to come and help me fight." The masked old man was still very nervous. He'd never really believed Yi Xian's words. Yi Xian said, "Issue a warrant for my arrest. I'll give you 1,000,000 universe veins if you're able to kill this woman in front of me." The masked old man hesitated for a moment, and then he said, "Young Master Yi, I can issue this warrant for you. But the condition is that you really have 1,000,000 universe veins." As he spoke, he paused for a moment and continued, "You have to. Otherwise, it'll affect my immortal treasure pavilion greatly." Yi Xian smiled, "You think I don't have it?" The masked old man hurriedly shook his head. "I absolutely didn't mean that. It's just a rule." Yi Xian tapped with his finger, and a spatial ring descended to the masked old man. There were 1,000,000 universe veins within the spatial ring. After the masked old man put the spatial ring away, he said, "Young Master Yi, wait a moment." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and vanished. In the distance, Supreme Mist laughed with ridicule, 1,000,000 universe veins? Kill me? Yi Xian, I really suspect that there's something wrong with your head. Yi Xian's expression was calm. Meanwhile, the masked old man suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian, and he said in a low voice, "Young Master Yi, someone contacted me. I need at least 3,000,000 universe veins to kill this woman, 3,000,000. Yi Xian frowned. He didn't think too much about it, and he just turned around to look at Dao Ling and Shi Tian. "Hand over the universe veins." Shi Tian and Dao Ling didn't hesitate at all. They hurriedly teleported over to Yi Xian, and then Yi Xian placed 2 spatial rings in the masked old man's hand. The masked old man immediately turned around and left. In the distance, Supreme Mist frowned slightly, "You actually have so many universe veins." As she spoke, she slowly clenched her right fist. Right at this moment, her pupils constricted, and she swiftly turned around and punched. Rumble. The space in front of Supreme Mist suddenly exploded apart, and then she retreated explosively for over 100 kilometers. Meanwhile, an afterimage charged towards her. It was a majestic sight. In the distance, Supreme Mist was shocked, and she didn't dare to be careless. She opened her palm, and an umbrella suddenly appeared in her hand. In the next moment, she opened the umbrella and pushed it forward. A palm suddenly slammed against the umbrella. Rumble. The umbrella suddenly exploded, and Supreme Mist, who was behind it, instantly retreated hundreds of thousands of meters away. As soon as she stopped, the galaxy behind her was directly destroyed, and at the same time, the remnant shadow had already dashed in front of her. Their speed was simply too fast. It was so fast that even Yi Xian wasn't able to accurately capture its trajectory. It was simply terrifying. In the distance, Supreme Mist's expression instantly changed when she saw the afterimage charge in front of her. It was too fast. She suddenly clenched her fists tightly, and a terrifying force swept out from within her. Rumble. With Supreme Mist at the center, the surroundings suddenly exploded, and a terrifying pressure and force instantly swept through the starry sky. Bang! An afterimage suddenly retreated madly in the starry sky. It was Supreme Mist. As she retreated, the afterimage appeared above her again, and then he suddenly stomped down. Rumble. Supreme Mist fell straight down from the starry sky. In an instant, she smashed into the ground, and then an enormous abyss appeared there. However, in the next moment, Supreme Mist charged out from within the abyss. But she'd only just emerged when the afterimage appeared above her again, and then he stomped down again. Rumble. Supreme Mist was stomped down into the bottomless abyss once more. Meanwhile, Master Yun suddenly stopped in the starry sky, and then he turned around and charged towards the black shadow. Obviously, he wanted to relieve the pressure on Supreme Mist. The black shadow suddenly turned around and smashed his fist forward. Rumble. In an instant, Yunshi was sent flying more than 100,000 zhang away. As soon as he stopped, his body split apart, and blood sprayed out. Master Yun was slightly stunned. So terrifying. Master Yun gazed at the figure in the distance, and his voice trembled as he said, "Who exactly are you? Do you know that we're from the Immortal Mausoleum?" The figure in the distance paid no attention to him, and he charged down towards the abyss. Obviously, he intended to kill Supreme Mist. Yi Xian suddenly gazed at Tianqi. "Tianqi, let's attack together." As soon as he finished speaking, he charged towards Master Yun. He was overjoyed when he saw that Master Yun was injured. Now that Supreme Mist was busy, it was the best opportunity for him to kill both Master Yun and the Tribulation Lord. Yi Xian was extremely swift, and a ray of light shot towards Master Yun. On the other hand, Tianqi had charged towards Master Yun as well when he heard Yi Xian. Master Yun's expression instantly changed when he saw Yi Xian and Tianqi charge towards him. He was quite fearful of Yi Xian and Tianqi. Especially Yi Xian because he'd actually been able to fight Supreme Mist for so long just now. Moreover, he was heavily injured right now. Master Yun didn't hesitate to turn around and flee. He was extremely swift, and he instantly vanished into the ends of the starry sky. Yi Xian and Tianqi were stunned when they witnessed this scene. He fled just like that? Yi Xian suddenly turned around to look at the Tribulation Lord in the distance. The Tribulation Lord had escaped the battle and vanished into the starry sky as soon as Supreme Mist fled. Yi Xian's face instantly darkened when he witnessed this scene. Damn it. These fellows flee when they can't win. They really don't have any backbone. As if he'd thought of something, Yi Xian looked towards the abyss below, and he was slightly puzzled. Is Supreme Mist dead? Right at this moment, a figure suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. It was exactly that figure from before. Yi Xian gazed at the figure while he became vigilant in his heart. Even if it was standing right in front of him, he wouldn't be able to see its true appearance. The figure suddenly said, "She fled." Yi Xian frowned slightly. I actually allowed her to flee. Meanwhile, the masked old man appeared in front of Yi Xian, and he returned 3 million universe veins to Yi Xian. Yi Xian thought for a moment, and then he withdrew 500,000 universe veins and passed them to the figure. "This is for you." The figure gazed at Yi Xian. "There's no need for that. I won't take a single cent from you if you don't complete the mission." Yi Xian grinned. "This is your reward." The figure fell silent for a moment before he said, "My principles." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and vanished into the horizon. Principles. Yi Xian gazed towards the depths of the starry sky and spoke softly, "Senior, who is he?" The masked old man replied, "You've met him." Yi Xian spoke solemnly, "The god of forgiveness?" The masked old man nodded. Yi Xian was quite curious, what's his background? The masked old man shook his head, "I don't know. In any case, he's very mysterious." Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, "I want all the information about the immortal tomb." The masked old man was slightly hesitant. Yi Xian smiled, "Is it very difficult?" The masked old man hurriedly shook his head, "No." As he spoke, he took out a scroll and passed it to Yi Xian. "Young Master Yi, I didn't hesitate just now because I didn't want to hurt young Master Yi. The Culpa Lord and the others aren't scary, but the immortal tomb behind them is scary, and the strength of the immortal tomb." Yi Xian glanced at the masked old man. "I hate it when people talk to me about the people behind them. I have people behind me, but am I too arrogant?" As he spoke, he snorted coldly. "They should be glad that I, Yi Xian, don't want to be a backer. Otherwise, I'd fucking rely on the entire universe to death. Do you believe me?" The masked old man hesitated and said, "Young Master Yi, this old man has one more thing to say. Bragging isn't a very good thing. Don't brag." Yi Xian spoke seriously, I'm not bragging this time. The masked old man nodded. I understand, I understand. Yi Xian. Chapter 2259. Yi Xian was speechless. He stopped talking nonsense with the old man and opened the scroll that the masked old man gave him. His expression froze when he saw it. Dao Ling suddenly walked over. He was curious when he saw Yi Xian's expression. Brother Yi, what's wrong? Yi Xian said calmly, see for yourself. As he spoke, he handed the scroll to Dao Ling. Like Yi Xian, Dao Ling froze as soon as he saw it. Shi Tian also walked over. He took the scroll and looked at it. His expression turned serious. Immortal Mausoleum. There were 980 people who had transcended time. 980 people. The three of them were completely dumbfounded when they saw that sentence. What the hell? 980 people who had transcended time? That was not the main point. The main point was that there were super terrifying experts who had transcended time in the Immortal Mausoleum. Actually, the three of them were no longer interested in looking at the experts behind them. 980 people who had transcended time. These experts were enough to kill the four of them. Yi Xian looked at the masked old man. This information is correct, right? The masked old man shook his head. No. Yi Xian was curious. Since they are so terrifying, why did they only send so few experts to kill us? Furthermore, the ones who came aren't even the strongest experts. The masked old man said in a low voice, we specially investigated what young Master Yi said. We discovered that it is not the entire Immortal Mausoleum that is targeting young Master Yi. It is just a few individuals within the Immortal Mausoleum. Yi Xian frowned. A few individuals? The masked old man nodded. There is also a person who possesses the Great Tao's providence in the Immortal Mausoleum. This person has an extremely high status in the Immortal Mausoleum. He might even be the next Immortal Mausoleum master. There are people below who want to curry favor with this person. Therefore, they took the initiative to send people to find you. They want to kill you to please that person. Hearing that, the faces of Yi Xian and the other two darkened. He really didn't care about martial ethics. The masked old man said in a low voice, actually, young Master Yi, since this matter isn't the intention of the Immortal Tomb Master, nor is it the intention of that person, then I feel that this matter can be big or small. You can ask the Pavilion Master to come forward and mediate for you. The Immortal Mausoleum is powerful, there is no need to fight to the death with them. Yi Xian said indifferently, mediation? They've tried to mess with us time and time again, and we still have to beg them? The masked old man hesitated for a moment before he said, it's mainly because all of you can't defeat him right now. Yi Xian was silent. Mediation? Yi Xian shook his head. I can't swallow this. Can't beat him? It doesn't matter. If I can't beat it, I can run. I'll come back after I've developed for a while. Can't beat him? Beg for mercy? This won't do. He, Yi Xian, was shameless, not without dignity. The masked old man said in a deep voice, young Master Yi, what do you plan to do? Yi Xian was silent for a moment, and then he smiled and said, since the entire Immortal Tomb isn't targeting us, then what are we afraid of? In any case, they're sneaky, aren't they? The masked old man shook his head. That's true, but if all of you kill them, then the matter will become huge. There'll be an endless stream of trouble in the future. Yi Xian turned to look at Dao Ling and Shi Tian. What do the two of you think? Dao Ling fell silent. Shi Tendo said, my reason tells me that we should sue for peace. But my heart tells me that we should fight them. Yi Xian roared with laughter. Then will you follow your reason or your heart? Shi Tian looked at Yi Xian. I'll listen to you, brother Yi. Yi Xian was speechless. Dao Ling also said, brother Yi, you make the decision. Yi Xian nodded. I've decided to continue fighting them. There are two reasons. First, those fellows will never let us go. They'll definitely come back to mess with us again. Second, if we go to the immortal tomb to beg, I really can't do something as humble as that. Shi Tian nodded. I can't do it either. Dao Ling smiled. Then we'll continue fighting them. Yi Xian nodded. Let's just fight them. Shi Tian suddenly said, Brother Yi, you haven't transcended time, but you're stronger than us. Why is that? Dao Ling looked at Yi Xian with curiosity in his eyes. Yi Xian smiled. I haven't transcended time. Instead, I've fused with time. Shi Tian frowned slightly. Fused with time? Yi Xian nodded. As he spoke, he shared his cultivation insights with Shi Tian and Dao Ling. Unfortunately, Shi Tian and Dao Ling couldn't fuse with the river of time. That was because the river didn't care about them. However, the two of them gained a lot from this. Yi Xian suddenly said, We've just broken through. Our realms aren't stable yet. The most important thing now is to stabilize our realms. Shi Tian nodded. All right. Yi Xian and the other two cultivated on the spot. Tian Qi didn't cultivate. He just ate meat at the side. Yi Xian and the other two felt helpless. This guy loved meat like his life. Without caring about Tian Qi, Yi Xian and the other two started to stabilize their realms. Inside the primordial shrine. Primordial Yuan smiled. I didn't expect that they actually survived. Primordial God Tree shook his head. That guy actually used money to kill revered mist. I didn't expect that someone actually dared to accept it. Primordial Yuan nodded. Do you know who that person was? Primordial God Tree shook his head. Patriarch, I haven't gone out for many years. I know some of the people and strengths in the past. But the ones that appeared later. As he spoke, he shook his head once more. He suddenly felt complicated. He hadn't gone out for many years. As for the primal god race, they had nearly been forgotten by the world. Primordial Yuan was silent for a moment before saying, in a bit, give each of them 1,000,000 universe veins. Primordial God Tree was stunned. Why? Primordial Yuan had a calm expression. I've decided to increase the investment. Primordial God Tree hesitated for a moment and then said, Patriarch, even we don't have many universe veins, our clansmen need them. Primordial Yuan shook his head. You're wrong. What my primal god race needs right now isn't money. What they need is lucky chances, massive lucky chances. Without lucky chances, no matter how much money we have, we won't be able to return to Primordial City. Primordial God Tree nodded. I understand. After speaking, he turned and left. Primordial Yuan looked into the distant horizon and said in a soft voice, Will they be my primal god race's last chance? Outside the primordial shrine. Yi Xian sat in the air like an old monk in meditation. He was using the river of time. When he had just broken through, because of revered mist and the others, he hadn't had time to control the river of time. The river of time had fused with him. In theory, as long as he wanted to, he could take the power of time. Now, he wanted to put it into practice. It had to be said that after fusing with the river of time, Yi Xian discovered that he could use the power of time even more smoothly. Unfortunately, he didn't have the profound blue sword. Otherwise, with his current strength, he could easily kill revered mist. Profound blue sword. Xiao Ta. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. He missed these two little fellows a little. Yi Xian shook his head, threw away the distracting thoughts in his mind, and began to concentrate on cultivating. Time slowly passed. After Yi Xian completely fused with the river of time, he began to try to stimulate the entire river of time. It wasn't realistic to stimulate the entire river of time with his own strength, but what if the river of time actively cooperated? However, even with the river of time's active cooperation, he could only stimulate the river of time within a radius of 1 million zhang. This was his current limit. However, this was already very terrifying. He could even mobilize the river of time within 1 million zhang. Although he hadn't transcended time yet, he was even more terrifying than that. Yi Xian took a deep breath, a little excited. He could now mobilize the power of time within 1 million zhang. If it was just the power of time alone, it wouldn't be so terrifying. However, if it was fused with his sword technique, that would be extraordinarily terrifying. As if thinking of something, Yi Xian turned to look at Dao Ling and Shi Tian in the distance. At this moment, their auras were at least several times stronger than before. Obviously, both of them had completely consolidated their realms. Now, if they were to fight the robber again, they would definitely win. At this moment, both of them also looked at Yi Xian. Dao Ling smiled. Brother Yi. Yi Xian said in a low voice, we have to cooperate. Dao Ling asked, like before? Yi Xian nodded, if the four of us join forces, then we'll definitely be able to instantly kill Venerable Mist with ease. However, if we fight her in a one-on-one battle, then any one of us will be unable to kill her. So, when you encounter members of the Immortal Tomb next time, just watch my signal. Dao Ling nodded, all right. Yi Xian gazed at Tianqi as well. Dao Ling and Shi Tian glanced at Tianqi, and then they nodded in agreement. Meanwhile, the primeval god tree suddenly appeared here. It opened its palm, and then 4 spatial rings slowly floated over to Yi Xian's group of 4. Every single spatial ring had 1 million universe veins. Yi Xian spoke in a low voice, Senior, the primeval god tree smiled. The patriarch asked me to give it to all of you. He said that all of you probably lack it right now. Yi Xian fell silent. He understood what the primeval god tree meant. Yi Xian didn't refuse it and put the spatial rings away, and then he said, Senior, please tell the primeval Yuan patriarch that we brothers will definitely repay the primeval god tree's help today. The primeval god tree nodded, thank you. Yi Xian smiled, we have to go. Senior, we'll meet again. As soon as he finished speaking, he led Dao Ling and the others away. The primeval god tree looked up into the sky in silence, and no one knew what it was thinking. In the starry sky, Dao Ling, who stood by Yi Xian's side, asked, Brother Yi, what should we do now? Yi Xian said indifferently, wait. Dao Ling frowned slightly, wait for who? Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. Wait for Venerable Mist and the others. If I'm not wrong, they'll definitely come looking for us soon. Remember, so long as any one of them appears, then immediately attack. Don't waste your breath, just kill them first. We'll chat after we kill them. This will be our style in the future. Dao Ling nodded, all right. Right at this moment, the space in front of them suddenly trembled. A moment later, a bolt of lightning appeared, and then the Tribulation Lord appeared. The Tribulation Lord had just appeared and was about to speak when Yi Xian's group of 4 suddenly swarmed over. The Tribulation Lord was dumbfounded. What the hell? I didn't even say anything. Vote first, then scold. Thank you. Chapter 2260. When he saw Yi Xian's group of 4 attack, the Tribulation Lord didn't hesitate to turn around and flee. He was extremely swift, and he vanished into the starry sky in the blink of an eye. Now, it was Yi Xian's group of 4 who were stunned. What the hell? He fled so decisively. Yi Xian's group of 4 were slightly speechless. Actually, the Tribulation Lord was very clear about one thing now, and that was that he was utterly unable to resist Yi Xian's group of 4 who had broken through. 1 against 4. Not to mention now, even if he still had the myriad tribulation body, he wouldn't be able to defeat the joint forces of Yi Xian's group of 4, let alone now. Thus, he decisively chose to flee. Only an idiot wouldn't flee. In the battlefield, Dao Ling said in a low voice, Brother Yi, this fellow isn't fighting us. Yi Xian's expression was slightly unsightly as well. Since when did the enemies become so smart? First it was Shi Qian who directly knelt, and now it was this tribulation lord who fled when the situation wasn't right. Could it be that it was because Dadeabi wasn't suppressed? But it was normal. If they knew to flee when they couldn't win, then others would definitely do the same. Shi Tian said in a low voice, "Will they come again?" Yi Xian nodded, "They should." Shi Tian looked at Yi Xian, "Brother Yi, why don't we go directly to the Immortal Mausoleum?" Yi Xian smiled, "Why would we go to the Immortal Mausoleum?" Shi Tian said in a low voice, "Doesn't the Immortal Mausoleum have a possessor of the karmic luck of the Grand Tao? Let's go find him and fight fairly." Yi Xian shook his head, "We can't go." Shi Tian was slightly puzzled, "Why?" Yi Xian said, "Find him, and then what?" Shi Tian said in a low voice, "Let's fight fairly." Yi Xian said indifferently, "What if he doesn't fight fairly? Even if he's willing, what if the Immortal Mausoleum isn't willing?" Shi Tian was silent. Yi Xian shook his head, "If we lose the bet, then we're finished." Shi Tian laughed bitterly. "But now, we're in a rather passive position." Yi Xian shook his head, "I think it's good now because we don't have to face the entire Immortal Mausoleum. We can use Revered Mist and the others as whetstones." Shi Tian's eyes narrowed. "Whetstone?" Yi Xian nodded. "We've already broken through. If we still want to improve, the best way is to fight. If you can kill them, then kill them. If you can't, then use them as sparring partners." Shi Tian was speechless. Yi Xian suddenly said, "Come on, let's go into the River of Time." With that, he brought the three of them into the River of Time. Now that he had fused with the River of Time, he could freely enter and leave the River of Time. Yearmoon City. No one knew who rebuilt the Time City that had been destroyed by Qin Guan. When Yi Xian's group arrived at Yearmoon City, more than a dozen spiritual senses suddenly swept over them. Yi Xian looked around and slowly closed his eyes. Soon, he raised his head and looked into the distance. In the next moment, he brought Shi Tian's group and disappeared into the distance. A while later, Yi Xian's group of 4 arrived at a riverside. On the riverside, there was a small courtyard. In front of the small courtyard was a vegetable garden. Inside the vegetable garden, a lean old man was weeding. Yi Xian walked to the vegetable garden and smiled, "Greetings, senior." The old man glanced at Yi Xian and continued weeding. Yi Xian smiled, "Senior, can we have a chat?" The old man replied calmly, "What do you want to chat about?" Yi Xian looked at the old man, "About life." In the distance, the old man suddenly put down his hoe and turned to look at Yi Xian, "Little fellow, I don't want to get involved in the matter between you and the Immortal Mausoleum. Don't have any ideas about me." Yi Xian smiled, "Senior misunderstands. I just want to ask Senior about a few things." The old man nodded slightly, "Ask away." Yi Xian spoke in a low voice, "What is a time immortal?" The old man in front of him was the only time immortal in the River of Time. After seeing this old man, Yi Xian discovered that this time immortal's strength was even more terrifying than he'd imagined. The old man put down his hoe and walked to a nearby stone bench to sit down. "All of you, sit." Yi Xian's group of 4 sat in front of the old man. The old man sized up Yi Xian's group and chuckled, "The last time I saw you, you were still a bit weak. But now, you've actually transcended the time immortal. This speed is not an ordinary kind of fast." As he spoke, his gaze descended onto Yi Xian, "Especially you. You were actually able to fuse with the River of Time. Needless to say, I'm really shocked." Yi Xian grinned, "Senior, I'm puzzled. Exactly what realm is this time immortal at? Has it transcended the time immortal?" The old man thought for a moment and said, "What is the time realm?" It refers to those who have just grasped the energy of time. Such people can be called the time realm. This realm was suggested by Miss Qin Guan. Of course, there were others who had started to grasp the energy of time before she did. However, they weren't called the Time Realm at that time, they were called Time Walkers. Moreover, everyone's understanding of the energy of time isn't sufficient. Miss Qin Guan perfected this realm very well. Yi Xian spoke in a low voice, "What about transcending the time immortal?" The old man chuckled, "The so-called transcending the time immortal is actually a joke." Yi Xian was slightly puzzled, "A joke?" The old man spoke softly, "Just look at the boundless river of time. How many people are able to transcend it? The so-called time immortal is even more of a joke." What is time immortal? It's eternal life, true eternal life. Because the passage of time isn't of any use to you. Only experts who have truly transcended the time immortal would dare to say that time immortal doesn't affect them. As he spoke, he looked at Shi Tian and Dao Ling who were at the side. He waved his right hand lightly, and a terrifying force instantly enveloped the two of them. Their expressions instantly changed violently when they were enveloped by this force because they noticed that their lifespans were actually starting to disappear at a rapid pace. Meanwhile, the old man withdrew his right hand. "That person over there spoke of the corrosion of time just now. Do you think they can resist it?" Yi Xian fell silent. The old man continued, "I've only seen one person who can resist the corrosion of time." Yi Xian was slightly curious, "Who?" The old man spoke softly, "Miss Qin Guan." Yi Xian was stunned, and then he said, "Didn't she say that she doesn't cultivate?" The old man shook his head and smiled, "I don't know as well. In any case, all I know is that time isn't able to corrode her. Besides her, even top-rate experts who have transcended the age barrier are unable to resist the corrosion of time." Yi Xian spoke in a low voice, "Senior, do you know of Exalt Mist from the Tomb of Immortals?" The old man nodded, "I know of Dao Yi Dian Dian." Yi Xian was slightly curious, "What realm is she at?" The old man smiled, "After transcending the age barrier, you know." Yi Xian frowned slightly, "I know." The old man nodded, "After transcending the age barrier, it's time to control it." Yi Xian's face froze. The old man smiled, "Do you think it's very ridiculous? After transcending, she actually wants to control the age barrier." Yi Xian nodded, "It's very ridiculous indeed." The old man spoke softly, "Transcending doesn't represent transcendence. It's just like the relationship between a man and a woman in the mortal world. Sleeping doesn't represent love." The expressions of Yi Xian's group of three froze when they heard this. What the fuck? What sort of analogy is that? Sleeping? It doesn't represent love? There's a story behind this old man. The old man smiled, "It's just like that. When they cultivate to a certain extent, they'll notice that the river of time isn't as simple as they thought. So, they start to study the river of time with the hope of controlling it. On the other hand, little fellow, it's like you've directly surpassed two realms and attained the age barrier. Moreover, you're different from others. Others rely on the river of time, but you've directly fused with it. There's a qualitative difference. It's just like the relationship between a man and a woman in the mortal world. You've both loved and slept with it." Yi Xian hesitated for a moment before he said, "Senior, let's not use analogies." "There's no need for analogies, I understand." He was slightly afraid of this old man. What kind of analogy is that? It's even more ridiculous than Xiao Ta's. The old man smiled, "Isn't my analogy a little inappropriate?" Yi Xian was speechless. "This isn't a matter of whether it's appropriate or not. You're simply taking the meaning of it astray." The old man continued, "Don't pay attention to these details. Let's get back to the main topic. Venerable Mist controls time, and time immortal is a realm above that. What is a time immortal? Those who experience the passage of time without losing themselves are time immortals. After attaining the time immortal realm, even though you can't truly avoid the passage of time, you can coexist with it. It's not fusion, it's coexistence. It's just like the relationship between a man and a woman in the mortal world. They just live together, not on the same bed. But you live together and on the same bed. That's amazing. Yi Xian and the others were speechless. Yi Xian felt a headache coming on. The old man continued, "What else do you want to ask?" Yi Xian spoke in a low voice, "Senior, according to what you said, I'm considered a time immortal now?" The old man shook his head, "No. Even though you've fused with the river of time, you still can't truly control it. This river is endless and profound. If you want to become a time immortal, you must first experience the endless passage of time and reach a certain height in your mental state. Only then can you be considered a time immortal. Thus, becoming a time immortal is a process of tempering your mental state. Right now, you are too young. You haven't been tempered by the passage of time, and your mental state hasn't transcended the passage of time. Thus, you can't be considered a time immortal." Yi Xian turned his head and looked at the old man. "Is it enough to walk through the river of time?" The old man shook his head. "Walking through the river of time is just a process. What you can comprehend in this process is the key. It's like when someone reads a book. If you read seriously, you can gain a lot from the book. If you don't read seriously, you won't gain anything." Hearing this, Yi Xian nodded, "I understand." Then, he looked at the old man. "Senior, to tell you the truth, us brothers are preparing to go to the immortal mausoleum. Are you interested in joining us?" The old man shook his head, "Not interested." Yi Xian said seriously, "Don't be afraid. We have people behind us." The old man said calmly, "There's no one behind me." Yi Xian still wanted to say something, but the old man shook his head. "The reason an old man like me has lived until now is because I stand aloof from worldly affairs. If I don't cause trouble for others, others won't cause trouble for me. I don't have any other requests. I just want to live longer, have more relationships, and enjoy more worldly pleasures, hee. Yi Xian. Chapter 2261. Yi Xian was speechless. This old man isn't serious. However, he was also a bit envious. Actually, isn't this old man's life a kind of happiness? The old man said, "Little guy, this immortal mausoleum isn't simple. You have to be careful." Yi Xian nodded, "Thank you for the reminder, senior." The old man smiled, "If the four of you want to become time immortals, you have to walk through this mortal world. Moreover, you might not gain anything. So, my suggestion is to stabilize your realm and cultivation and reach the level of controlling time. The Tao of time seems simple but is actually very complicated. It isn't something that can be comprehended in 2 or 3 days." Yi Xian nodded, "I understand." With that, he stood up and cupped his fists. "Senior, thank you for answering my question." The old man smiled, "Little friend, I also have 2 questions. Can I ask you?" Yi Xian nodded, "Of course." The old man smiled, "How do you fuse with time?" Yi Xian blinked, "Senior wants to know?" The old man nodded, "Of course, if it isn't convenient, I won't force you." Yi Xian smiled, "It's actually very simple. You can talk to the river of time. It has intelligence and can communicate with it." The old man was silent. Yi Xian smiled, "Does senior not believe me?" The old man nodded, "It's a bit unbelievable. However, I know little friend has no reason to lie to me." "Then, can you explain?" Yi Xian shook his head and smiled, "This can't be explained. I can only say that it depends on your eloquence." Eloquence. The old man shook his head and smiled, "Little friend, don't tease me. I've come into contact with the intelligence of the river of time. It's extremely difficult to get along with." Yi Xian thought about it and said, "You really want to know?" The old man nodded. Yi Xian grinned, "There's someone behind me." The old man's expression froze. Yi Xian smiled, "Senior, we'll meet again." With that, he stood up and left. The old man was silent for a long time before shaking his head, "Damn second generation." On the other side, Yi Xian and his 3 brothers were traversing the river of time. The four of them were silent. Yi Xian said softly, "It is not realistic to reach the time immortal level at the moment." Shi Tian nodded. "It's indeed unrealistic. Our cultivation speed is already very fast. Any faster, and that would be abnormal." Yi Xian nodded slightly. "However, with our current strength, if we encounter an expert on the level of the time immortal, we will be beaten up again. We need to prepare for a rainy day." As he spoke up to hear, he turned to look at Shi Tian. "Shi Tian, you said earlier that you wanted to share the ruins of a time immortal with us. Where is it?" Shi Tian laughed bitterly. "Brother Yi, even if we find the ruins of the lunar immortal and obtain his inheritance, I'm afraid it'll be difficult for us to break through in a short period of time." Yi Xian smiled and said, "You misunderstood me. My goal isn't his legacy, but his legacy." Shi Tian frowned. "Inheritance?" Yi Xian nodded. "We have to get some money. So long as we have enough money, then we can even kill a time immortal." Dao Ling hurriedly nodded. "Yes, yes. Miss Qin Guan doesn't even have to lift a finger to kill someone." Shi Tian fell silent for a moment before he said, "Let's go." The four of them left the River of Time, and as soon as they did, Venerable Mist led the Tribulation Lord and Master Yun to appear before Yi Xian's group of four. Venerable Mist gazed at Yi Xian with a rather gloomy expression. "You damnable swordsman. Let me see if you can escape this time." Yi Xian suddenly withdrew the Dark Heaven token, and in the next moment, the masked old man appeared here. The masked old man suddenly felt a headache when he saw Yi Xian. "This young Master Yi is simply a devil." Yi Xian spoke indifferently, "Help me put out a bounty. I'll give you 5 million universe veins if you kill Venerable Mist, 5 million. In the distance, Venerable Mist's expression instantly became ferocious, and she glared angrily at Yi Xian. "Have you gone mad? Do you have 5 million universe veins?" Yi Xian opened his palm, and a spatial ring fell in front of the masked old man. The masked old man glanced at it, and there really were 5 million universe veins within the spatial ring. The masked old man was instantly shocked and he saw these 5 million universe veins. Where did this fellow get so many universe veins from? These universe veins were given to the four of them by the primal god race. Each of them had 1 million universe veins, and they already had 1 million universe veins to begin with. Thus, the four of them had 9 million universe veins. Because besides the 2 million universe veins that the primal god race had given them, Yi Xian still had the 1 million universe veins that his mother had given him. When they saw Yi Xian really produce 5 million universe veins, it wasn't just the masked old man, even the distant Tribulation Lord and Master Yun were shocked. Both of them turned to glance at Venerable Mist. It had to be said that at this moment, both of them wanted to attack and kill Venerable Mist. 5 million universe veins. This absolutely wasn't something that an ordinary person could produce. Only a top influence like the Immortal Mausoleum would be able to produce so many universe veins. Where had Yi Xian obtained them from? At this moment, Venerable Mist suddenly said fiercely, "It's the primal god race. The primal god race is helping them." She knew that these universe veins had definitely been given to Yi Xian by the primal god race. Only a super influence like the primal god race could produce so many universe veins. Although the primal god race wasn't as strong as they were in the past, they were still able to produce 5 million universe veins. Thinking of this, killing intent erupted from Venerable Mist's eyes. In the past, it had been the primal god race that had stopped them from killing Yi Xian's group of four. But now, Yi Xian's group of four had experienced an explosive increase in strength. Even if they joined forces, it would still be difficult to kill them. In the distance, the masked old man glanced at Yi Xian and said, "Young Master Yi, do you really want to issue a bounty?" Yi Xian nodded, "Yes. I will give these 5 million universe veins to whoever can take that woman's head." The masked old man hesitated for a moment and then nodded, "All right." With that, he turned around to leave. At this moment, Venerable Mist suddenly said fiercely, "Sir, does your immortal treasure pavilion really want to help him?" The masked old man looked at Venerable Mist. "We are only helping to issue a bounty. We haven't helped young Master Yi." Venerable Mist glared at the masked old man. "You dare to issue a bounty for someone from the immortal tomb?" The masked old man frowned. "You aren't trying to threaten me, right?" Venerable Mist slowly clenched her right hand. "What if I say yes?" The masked old man said lightly, "If you do that, then I can only call you Pavilion Master. Let me tell you, Venerable Mist. This young Master Yi might not be able to kill you if he issues a bounty for you, but if you annoy my Pavilion Master and he issues a bounty for you, your head will roll to the ground in an instant. Do you believe me?" Venerable Mist was so angry that she laughed instead. How laughable. My head roll to the ground? How absurd. At the side, Master Yun hesitated for a moment and said, "Venerable Mist, don't offend the Immortal Treasure Pavilion." He dealt with the Immortal Treasure Pavilion in the past. Even though the Immortal Treasure Pavilion was a merchant group and didn't have much combat strength, the Pavilion Master was really heaven-defying. Venerable Mist's expression was extremely unsightly. "It's the Immortal Treasure Pavilion that's not giving me face." In the distance, Yi Xian suddenly looked at the masked old man and spoke anxiously, "Senior, she's even threatening our Immortal Treasure Pavilion. How can we tolerate this? Ask Qin Guan to come out." The masked old man hesitated for a moment, and then he turned to look at Venerable Mist. "Venerable Mist, I'll repeat for the last time. We're only issuing a bounty for young Master Yi and have no intention of helping him. If you have the money, we can issue a bounty for you as well." Venerable Mist stared fixedly at the masked old man. "If you dare to issue that bounty, then it's equivalent to representing the Immortal Treasure Pavilion to declare war on my immortal tomb." She was very clearly aware that if the Immortal Treasure Pavilion really issued this bounty, then there would definitely be people coming to kill her. 5 million universe veins. Someone would definitely be tempted, and even the experts within the immortal tomb would be tempted. 5 million universe veins. It was really too much. Not to mention others, even she herself was tempted. When Master Yun heard Venerable Mist, his expression changed. "Venerable Mist, you can't." The Tribulation Lord hurriedly said, "You absolutely can't." At this moment, both of them were slightly panicked. Firstly, they were utterly unable to represent the entire immortal tomb. If something like this happened, then it would be like playing with fire. Secondly, that mysterious Pavilion Master was really heaven-defying. Especially the Tribulation Lord, he'd personally experienced how terrifying Qin Guan was. She was simply a woman that was even more flashy than Yi Xian. Venerable Mist paid no attention to the Tribulation Lord and Master Yun, and she stared fixedly at the masked old man. The masked old man thought for a moment before he nodded. He opened his palm, and a talisman suddenly shot into the sky. In the next moment, an enormous screen of light appeared in the depths of the starry sky. Within the screen of light, a blurry figure gradually condensed into appearance, and it wasn't long before Qin Guan appeared before everyone. At this moment, Qin Guan was within a cave, and an emaciated old man sat cross-legged not too far behind her. The old man didn't emanate any aura. Yi Xian glanced at the cave and was slightly puzzled. Did Qin Guan rob a tomb? Qin Guan suddenly turned around, and she was slightly stunned when she saw Yi Xian, and then she smiled and said, "Young Master Yi, are you looking for me?" Yi Xian hurriedly shook his head. "No, it's not me. It's the members of the Immortal Tomb who are looking for you." Qin Guan blinked. "The members of the Immortal Tomb are looking for me?" Yi Xian nodded. As he spoke, he pointed at Venerable Mist in the distance. Qin Guan looked at Venerable Mist. "Is there something you need?" Venerable Mist's expression was calm. "Pavilion Master Qin, your people want to place a bounty on me." Qin Guan frowned slightly, and she looked at the masked old man. The masked old man hesitated, and then said, "It's young Master Yi who wants to place a bounty on her, and it has nothing to do with us. But she doesn't want us to place a bounty on her, and said that if we place a bounty on her, It's a declaration of war against the immortal tomb. Qin Guan looked at Venerable Mist. Can you represent the immortal tomb? Venerable Mist stared at Qin Guan. Yes. Qin Guan thought about it, and then said, Are you sure? Venerable Mist said fiercely, Why do you have so much nonsense to say? If I say I can, then I can. What, does your celestial treasure pavilion dare to declare war against the immortal tomb? Qin Guan blinked. The next moment, she formed a seal with both hands, and silently chanted an incantation. After a moment, she suddenly opened her eyes, and shouted, Mali Mali Ku, money come, oh no, sword come. Sword come. Boom. Suddenly, a sword appeared above Venerable Mist's head. The next moment, that sword fell straight down. Before Venerable Mist could react, that sword stabbed into her body. Boom. Venerable Mist's body shattered. Everyone. P.S. Mali Mali Ku, tickets come. Chapter 2262. At this moment, Mist Reverend was completely stunned. What's going on? She actually didn't even sense that attack. The Tribulation Lord and Yunshi were astounded, and their eyes were filled with terror. Pavilion Master Qin is a swordsman? Right at this moment, a terrifying aura suddenly enveloped the Mist Reverend, and the Mist Reverend's soul that should have dissipated was actually forcefully preserved under the envelopment of this aura. Meanwhile, a middle-aged man appeared on the other side of the sky. The Tribulation Lord and Yunshi were shocked and they saw the middle-aged man, and they hurriedly bowed slightly. Sage Gu. Yi Xian glanced at the middle-aged man and was slightly surprised. Obviously, the middle-aged man was an extraordinary expert at the Time Immortal Realm. Sage Gu gazed at Qin Guan. Pavilion Master Qin, you're going too far. Qin Guan's beautiful brows knit together slightly. Are you criticizing me? Sage Gu's face remained expressionless. Yes. Qin Guan nodded. Looks like you want to fight. Sage Gu's expression was calm. Please provide me with your guidance, Pavilion Master Qin. Qin Guan spoke abruptly. Where's the starship? Bang! Suddenly, the space above Yi Xian and the others exploded apart, and then an enormous being flew out from within it. The enormous being was shaped like a ship, and it was over 100 kilometers long. It was simply like an enormous starry sky beast, and it emanated a shapeless pressure just by standing there. On the deck of the ship were a few hundred things that looked like flying birds. Every single one of them was completely pitch black, and it seemed to be made of some unknown special material. Sage Gu frowned slightly. Are you intending to kill me with a divine artifact? Qin Guan's expression was calm. Divine armaments, dispatch and blast him to death. As soon as he finished speaking, a few hundred divine armaments suddenly shot into the sky, and then they aimed directly at Sage Gu. After that, rays of white light surged towards Sage Gu. Yi Xian's pupils constricted when he saw the rays of white light flee. As soon as he finished speaking, he grabbed Dao Ling, Shirtian, and Tianqi and ran. In every ray of white light, there was a disregard for martial virtue. Hundreds of disregard for martial virtue. Damn! Yi Xian panicked. A single disregard for martial virtue was already so terrifying, and now hundreds of them appeared together. Yi Xian's scalp went numb. As soon as Yi Xian and the others ran away, horrible explosions came from behind them. Even though Yi Xian and the others were dozens of galaxies away, they still felt their eardrums burst. They were scared out of their wits. Yi Xian and the other three stopped and turned around to take a look. What they saw made them dumbfounded. As far as they could see, all they could see was darkness. Dao Ling said with a trembling voice, at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly said, Look. As they spoke, they looked towards the starry sky. The three of them looked in the direction of Yi Xian's finger and saw that the ancient sage was still there. However, he was only left with a wisp of his soul. Moreover, this wisp of soul was already dim and lightless, like a wisp of green smoke. Yi Xian and the others looked at each other in shock. This Gu god was really powerful. He was not dead. The Kulpa Lord and Master Yun were not dead either, because they were hiding behind the Gu god, and he had blocked most of the power for them. Even so, they were not well off. Their bodies were blown up. Even their souls were blasted until they were transparent. To recover completely, it would take at least 100 years. The three were completely dumbfounded. Especially the leader, Gu god. He was a time immortal, a rare top expert in this world, but he was dumbfounded just now. What were those things? The power was so great that even he could not block it. Deep in the starry sky, Qin Guan looked at the Gu god with a cold expression. Get the Tomb Lord of the Immortal Tomb out. The Gu god, Qin Guan frowned. She waved her right hand, and the hundreds of divine armaments suddenly flew up and aimed at the Gu god. The Gu god's expression changed drastically, and he hurriedly said, Pavilion Master Qin, this is a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding, a huge misunderstanding. Qin Guan suddenly pulled out a gun and pulled the trigger. Bang! A ray of white light directly ignored the starry sky and blasted onto the Gu god's body. Rumble. The Gu god retreated explosively, and his soul dimmed slightly. He was so weak that it felt like a single breath could blow him apart. Terror appeared in the Gu god's eyes. I will really die. I will really die. That was what he felt at this moment. The woman in front of him had the ability to kill him. Qin Guan looked at the Gu god with a cold expression. If you can win, then fight. If you can't, then it's a misunderstanding. Your skin is as thick as young Master Ye's. On the other side, Yi Xian's face instantly darkened. What do you mean by as thick as me? This Qin Guan really didn't know how to speak. It would probably be difficult for her to find a husband in the future. At this moment, the spacetime behind the Gu god suddenly trembled. The next moment, an old man walked out. After the old man came out, he hurriedly looked at Qin Guan. Pavilion Master Qin, I am the head of the 6 sages of the Immortal Mausoleum, Sage Shu. Qin Guan suddenly became expressionless. What? Am I not worthy of your Immortal Mausoleum's Mausoleum Lord to come out? Sage Shu hurriedly said, No, no. The Mausoleum Lord is busy, he. Qin Guan angrily said, Busy your ass. After saying that, she was stunned. The next moment, her face turned red, and she lightly patted her cheeks with both hands. Don't use vulgar language. He. Everyone, Qin Guan looked at Sage Shu. Is your immortal mausoleum declaring war on my immortal treasure pavilion? Sage Shu hurriedly said, No, no. This is just a misunderstanding, a huge misunderstanding. Qin Guan's expression was calm. Tell your immortal mausoleum lord that if you cause trouble for my immortal treasure pavilion again, I will go to your immortal mausoleum and blow it up. After saying that, she turned and disappeared. Sage Shu's expression was somewhat ugly. The immortal mausoleum had never been threatened like this before, but there was nothing he could do. This pavilion Master Qin was too mysterious. Even the immortal mausoleum didn't dare to easily provoke her. As if thinking of something, he suddenly turned to look at the ancient sage. At this moment, the ancient sage's soul was already so illusory that it could not be seen. Sage Shu was shocked and was about to attack when Sage Gu shook his head. It's too late. Sage Shu fell silent. Sage Gu softly said, I originally thought that only a few people in this world could kill me. Saying that, he shook his head. Arrogance killed me. If he hadn't spoken so arrogantly before, he wouldn't have died. But there were no ifs in life. Sage Gu suddenly looked at Yi Xian's group of 4 in the distance. Old Shu, these 4 people have great Dao luck and are extremely monstrous. Don't let them grow, or they will bring you great disaster, even to the immortal mausoleum. After saying that, he completely disappeared. Sage Shu raised his head and looked at Yi Xian's group of 4 in the distance. In the next moment, he suddenly disappeared. At the end of the distant starry sky, beside Yi Xian, Shi Tian softly said, "Time immortal, why are the enemies always abnormally strong? It wasn't like this before." Dao Ling solemnly said, "Before, we were facing a time controller, but now, the enemy is a time immortal. This, who can withstand it?" Tian Qi continued to eat his meat. It didn't matter who the enemy was, as long as there was meat to eat. Yi Xian suddenly said, "Brothers, do you have confidence?" Dao Ling hesitated and then said, "To be honest, no." Shi Tian nodded. "Indeed." Yi Xian laughed. "Even if you don't have confidence, we have to fight. Brothers, let's fight." After saying that, he directly disappeared. Chi. A sword suddenly tore through the starry sky and slashed at Sage Shu, who was traversing the starry sky. Dao Ling, who was beside him, suddenly laughed and said, "Time immortal. What is there to fear? Let's just fight." After saying that, he directly disappeared. Shi Tian nodded. "Then let's fight. We have no other choice anyway." After saying that, he directly rushed towards the distant Sage Shu. The eyes of the leader, Yi Xian, flashed ferociously. He directly drew his sword and slashed. This slash directly mobilized the power of time within a radius of 1,000,000 zhang. Not only that, but he also activated the power of his bloodline. This slash, he used all his strength. He had to use all his strength. After all, before, they couldn't even defeat a time controller, let alone an expert at the level of a time immortal. 2 ranks higher. If it was before, perhaps there wouldn't be any problem. But now, after all, how many of those who could reach the level of time immortal were idiots? 2 ranks higher. How difficult. But they had to fight. Escape? There was nowhere to escape. Rumble. The starry sky suddenly exploded. The next moment, a wave of sword light shattered, and the leader, Yi Xian, directly retreated tens of thousands of zhang away. As soon as Yi Xian was sent flying, Dao Ling, with his 10,000 elephants' dharma body, rushed to the head of the Sage Shu, and then smashed down with a fist. Boom! When this fist descended, it seemed as if it would crush the vast starry sky. It was extremely terrifying. The Sage Shu's face was expressionless. He flicked his sleeve. Rumble. A terrifying power of time swept out. In an instant, Dao Ling's entire body was directly blasted away, and his 10,000 elephants' dharma body was instantly destroyed. At this moment, an afterimage rushed in front of the Sage Shu, and he directly punched at the Sage Shu's head. Tian Qi. As this punch blasted out, the surrounding starry sky directly exploded, and countless stars were extinguished. The purest power of the physical body. The Sage Shu's face was expressionless, and he directly punched out. Head on. Rumble. Tian Qi directly flew back. As soon as he stopped, his right arm directly exploded, and his flesh split open. Blood splattered everywhere. It was extremely tragic. Meanwhile, Shi Tian suddenly appeared behind Sage of Book, and then he flipped his right hand before suddenly slapping down with his palm. A terrifying force poured out from the center of his palm, and at this moment, a shapeless barrier appeared behind Sage of Book. Bang! The force was actually completely blocked by the invisible barrier. The Sage Shu suddenly turned around and kicked. Bang! The space in front of the Sage Shu exploded apart, and Shi Tian retreated explosively for over 100 kilometers. As soon as he stopped moving, a wisp of blood seeped out from the corner of his mouth, and his internal organs had been torn apart. The battle between them had merely taken less than a breath of time. In this one breath of time, the book sage had blocked all the attacks from the 4 of them. On the other side, Dao Ling wiped off the blood from the corners of his mouth, and then he gazed at the Sage Shu and said, "Brother Yi, we can't beat him." Yi Xian fell silent for a moment, and then he said, "We might have been set up by Dedeabi. That fellow doesn't care about martial virtue. Can't he start with a weaker opponent when he's arranging his enemies? It's really in the Milky Way galaxy. A furious roar suddenly resounded from a certain room. Start with a weaker opponent? Who do you think you are? Oh. Who do you think you are? Did Yi Xian come first, and then Tianqi? Bullshit, I've been putting up with you for a long time. You. Meanwhile, a sword suddenly appeared in the room. The walking sword of the Tao. The room was deathly silent. After a short moment, a calm voice resounded. My words were indeed a bit overboard. I apologize for that, and I will reflect on it. I won't do it again. I promise. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.